This Lynchburg City School Board work session is now called to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, our first discussion tonight deals with discipline, and I think Ms. Brown's going to lead us in this discussion. I see she has some friends here too.
Good afternoon, Board.
I know that you've been out in the schools Friday and Monday and Tuesday, so the fact that you were able to get this together for us is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Today I'd like to start reviewing our discipline policies and procedures by going over the 4 key LCS's discipline objectives. These objectives were created in 2016 as we discussed how to make changes and revisions to the discipline and reframing our practices as a division. Our first key objective was to increase equity and discipline that is administered throughout LCS, that being staff, students, parents, and community stakeholders. Number 2, a greater focus on positive behavioral intervention supports to achieve increased opportunities for student success. Using positive behavioral interventions as a systemic approach, meaning that as a whole division, we're starting to look at the behaviors, strategic plans, research-based strategies, building a framework for best practices for the division. 3, alignment of LCS discipline policies with those of VSBA. We started converting older policies to the new VSB format and also adopting and modifying some of the policies that we had as we look at them through our equity lens. We're still updating these policies as we convert Section 7 in our school board policies over, and that will be an ongoing process every 3 years as we review and update those policies. 4, fulfill the agreement with the Office of Civil Rights to identify improvements and revisions to existing disciplinary policies. Even without the Office of Civil Rights, Lynchburg City Schools has been dedicated to look at disproportionality in ways in which we can improve equity in terms of discipline, giving clarity for procedures, process, and making sure that we're consistent and fair with implementing policies and disciplinary as we're working with the Office of Civil Rights. Changes to the policies were made by the board, like I said, in August 2016. Communications to parents for suspensions were initially and are initially communicated by the principal or assistant principal via phone and followed up by a notification of suspension letter and a copy of the student's parents' due process rights. Dress code updates were pushed out to schools through dress code videos, parent-student handbooks, and newsletters. Gang training and awareness has been provided to administration and teachers. Should a student be suspected of gang activity, whether it's hand gestures, whether it's paraphernalia, whether it's through association, we try to promote awareness and advocacy by bringing the student and the parents in, reviewing the policy, but also informing them about what a gang is, what are the implications of a gang, and also giving them an out. How can we best support you? What do you want to do in the future to give them other alternatives and solutions? At the beginning of the school year, students are presented with the acceptable use policy in reference to personal electronic devices. These AUPs are shared with parents. They're reviewed by the teachers with the students, and they're signed by the students once they are fully aware of the policy in regards to personal electronic devices. Legislative updates were implementing starting in the 2018 school year that outlined the guidelines for when a student could be suspended for 11 to 45 days and beyond, thus resulting in a long-term suspension. Students may be suspended longer should the incident involve bodily harm and/or aggravating circumstances. In addition, students pre-K grade through grade 3 cannot be suspended for more than 3 days unless there is evidence of physical harm, credible threat, or physical harm to others, or an aggravating circumstance. So you might be wondering, what is an aggravating circumstance? What aggravating circumstance involves examples of assault and battery, malicious wounding, brandishing a weapon with intent to cause harm, credible threats to staff, students, school, or others, and a school that may cause serious harm. What does the consistent trend of reducing the number of all students who receive discipline referrals and who have been placed in, out of school on suspension? Here we see the data reflects that we are in a constant trend of reducing the number of Black students who have received discipline referrals and who have been placed in, out of school on suspension. Okay, and I skipped a slide. Hold on. Taking a closer look at the percentage of African American students who have been referred at least once on the secondary level, we have seen a steady trend of decrease in the numbers of African American students receiving a referral. And this is your secondary levels. And some of them have double-digit decreases. On the elementary level, the percentage of students who have been referred at least once have also declined. Regarding long-term suspensions, 11 or more days, there has been more fluctuation. This school year, we have seen an increase in assault and battery codes related to fights as well as drug possessions. And we've had one repeat student. Reflected above is a snapshot of the board's long-term decisions over the last 3 years. So this is outcome data from each of the board meetings. Lastly, we would like to provide you with data on expulsions. As you can see, LCS exercise expulsions rarely and in the most extreme circumstances as a disciplinary measure. And for the board, for the new board members, I provided you some guidelines in which we use when we exercise expulsions. Again, I say we very rarely exercise expulsions within the division. Our practice has been to educate all students at all times. However, when there are serious threats to the community, to the school, or to other students, at times we will use an expulsion. The LCS journey. Now that you've heard the objectives, policy updates, and data, we would like to briefly revisit our timeline around our discipline efforts. In 2012, we utilized effective school-wide discipline, which led into our use of positive behavior interventions and supports, PBIS, during the 2013-2014 school year. The PBIS model continues to be used across the division as we move towards the more comprehensive process of the Virginia tier systems of supports. As you see from the timeline, we currently have 2 schools and divisions in year 1, VTSS implementation, and 4 schools that make up cohort 2 and have completed tier 1 training around tier 1 elements. At this time, I'll return the presentation over to Jackie Penn, our division PBIS coach.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. So we're going to briefly revisit what the PBS framework looks like on the next slide. So from this diagram, you can see that it is a multi-tiered system of support. And the VTSS framework incorporates the PBS model within its practices. It's a data-informed decision-making framework for establishing the academic, behavioral, and social-emotional supports for a school to be an effective learning environment. At the Tier 1 level, all schools in our division will have posted expectations, a behavioral matrix, minor-major flowcharts, and identified classroom strategies that can be used with all students. So that's at the Tier 1 level. Shortly, you'll hear from our pilot school principals, and they will actually show you Tier 1 pieces. In order to build this level of structure, there are certain elements that are essential to the effectiveness, efficiency, and success of VTSS in our school division. These are the essential elements that we are creating within our schools that are evident in our practices, which include critical features such as alignment of the work that we are doing at the state, division, and school level. We place a huge emphasis on data-informed decision-making and the use of evidence-based practices. These are a list of all of the trainings that we've conducted thus far over the last 2 years in our school division, at our cohort sites, at our pilot sites, and some division-level trainings as well around VTSS. And I would also like to share how do we sustain VTSS going forward. We're embedding acknowledgement systems within our schools. So it's not about high costs, incentives, and tangible items. We may start at that point and fade later. So we embed practices, we embed the expectations. You'll see that with our Tier 1 samples from our principals. Coaching supports, training of the trainer model. So if I go to training, then I would actually bring that information back to the school at large so that we are maximizing our capacity of resources. So some samples of what this sounds like in our schools. Our cohort 1 or pilot schools are EC Glass and Lincoln Middle. This is as of 17-18 school year. At cohort 2 schools are as listed: Heritage Elementary, Sandusky Elementary, Sandusky Middle, and Carl B. Hutcherson. They have just completed Tier 1 training of VTSS. And around EC Glass school-wide expectations, they use the discipline data to determine some of the major areas that they would like to address school-wide, which include be here, be respectful, be responsible, be safe. And this is an artistic depiction by one of the teachers that's posted all over the school for student and staff reference. This is a sample of the matrix that was developed in their Tier 1 training stage at EC Glass. The matrix is basically a behavioral curriculum that's taught to students through lesson plans, even music videos, which we recently developed. It was shown on the news. So it's a way to get community support around the work that we're doing. Here are some samples of how EC Glass now acknowledges students. They may receive top honors, which is a form of a positive referral that they get, the students' parents get notified of the achievement. They may receive a tangible prize of some sort. We also have instituted postcards home to parents, which kind of builds that community and school link. We also recognize the specific behaviors that they do per the behavior curriculum matrix. Okay, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Prophet so that he can give you a little more insight on the SPOT expectations at LMS.
Thank you, Ms. Penn. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to Dr. Edwards, Dr. Copeland, and Mrs. Morrison, all the members of the board. It's good to be with you tonight. You're getting right now a green folder, Linkhorn Green, that is going to have in it several different things I'm going to just touch base on. One is our LMS discipline matrix. The other is a bright spot card that we use for positive recognition. The other is a postcard that gets mailed home. And then the pamphlet inside, yours is a little different than mine, as I have the prototype, you have the final version, is a flyer that we sent home explaining our process. SPOT, or How to Spot a Jaguar, more specifically, is an initiative that we created through the gathering of data that was collected prior to my coming on board at Linkhorn Middle School. But that first year was a bit of a transition year. They got caught up in a few things and were unable to move forward. We were able to finish that work at the beginning of the school year, and I'm very proud of that. We really came together as a VTSS committee along with Ms. Penn and our VTSS coach, Ms. Renee James, and we were able to get things together and get things rolled out. And so what we have come up with is, if you refer to the larger matrix, the laminated matrix in your folder, How to Spot a Jaguar, we came up with expectations for all settings, which is everywhere throughout the school, the classroom, transitions, which is between classes, and then in the cafeteria. These are posted throughout the school in every classroom, every area. We also have specific posters for all settings, classrooms, transitions, and cafeteria that the students are familiar with. We also created lesson plans that were implemented throughout the first weeks of school, and we're going to continue throughout that with our initiative as we move forward into next year. And in fact, we're going to stress that out over multiple weeks next year. We also ensured that teachers were fully on board with this because the data that, as I said, was collected from teachers and staff and parents in the community was used to help formulate this matrix. And one of the positive things about it is we then created the You're a Bright Spot ticket, which you see there in the middle of the screen. This gives teachers a way to recognize students who are meeting the behavioral expectations, and the top half is given to the student, the lower half is detached and kept by the teacher. Those green stubs at the bottom are then put into a spotlight jar. You see the fancy jar there our students created, but I like it. Is then deposited into that jar, and then every week we do a drawing where we draw out and recognize students who have positive behavior, and they receive a prize through our counseling center they go pick up. In addition to that, also to encourage teacher participation, we had a partnership with Blaze Pizza, and the teachers received a Fire in Your Belly award where they got a free Blaze Pizza, trying to incentivize the teachers to help recognize the positive behavior that we had, that we wanted to have modeled from our students. Additionally to that, we created the You've Been Spotted postcard, which has that first picture you saw that has the S, the P, the O, the T with the different images on it. This is a postcard that was created. We actually have a committee who gets together looking at the positive students that are referred, and the student has to really, really, really go above and beyond to receive this. We wanted to have something that we could send home that could be displayed on the fridge, or just a parent has it, and we felt like it's also handwritten, so it has that extra communication, that extra personal feel and touch to it that a student will receive and a parent will receive when they get that at home. It's very important to us to make sure we do that. As such, the actual banner you see on the front of the postcard was designed by our students. We had a design contest school-wide, and then we picked the 4 winners and then worked with local high school art classes to digitize and then create that to have the banner you see on the front. Actually, we have a gigantic vinyl version of this banner in our main entryway as you come into the school. So it's becoming what's going to hopefully be a cornerstone of what we anticipate from our students moving forward. We also shared all of this information at our Rising 6th grade night when we invited all of our upcoming new 6th graders to come to Linkhorn to see what we're all about and what they're going to become when they are a Jaguar. Lastly, the pamphlet that you have before you was created by Renee James, our VTSS coach, because as we were talking about a way to send home information to parents to communicate what we're doing, at first we had a letter, a nice plain vanilla letter, and we're like, that's just too boring. And you know, a lot of times you get a letter, you may not read through it all the way. So we decided to change things up a bit, and it was a really profound idea. I want to give her all the credit. I might take a 0.5% of credit for that. She can take all 99.999. I don't do math. I was an English teacher, so I apologize. But the pamphlet is great because it's an easy access. It explains what is VTSS. It explains our mission and vision, our mission statement about link together, learn forever. It talks about our future team tasks. It has an example of our poster that is displayed, and on the back of it, if you open it up, it has the actual expectation behavior matrix that we created so that parents are well informed of what's going to happen. And I feel like these are some great initial steps that we have taken at Lincoln to be able to share what we're trying to do as we continue to move forward with this initiative. I'm looking forward to even bigger and better things. We actually have a group of students who presented to us as administrators ways to have students earn even more rewards for positive behavior, up to and including a way to earn their way back into some of the dance incentives and other things that we do throughout the year. And so they're actually going to come in and present that to us over the summer to our VTSS team as we meet in the summer. So that gives you a brief overview. If I don't stop talking, I'll talk all night, as most people who know me know, and I don't want to do that. But that is the How You Spot a Jaguar initiative through our VTSS that's in place currently at Lincoln Middle School. And I thank you so much.
Well,
Okay. What are Cohort 2 principals saying? At Heritage Elementary School, the principal, Ms. Anderson, who's in the audience tonight, she said, "My team is so excited about tweaking and implementing what currently exists to make our learning environment better." And she was really, really excited when she gave us that quote. At Colby Hutchinson Early Learning Center, Ms. Polly Smith said, "VTSS is helping Hutchinson to create competent, confident, and happy learners by working with children and families." Sandusky Middle School, Mr. Matthew Mason, the principal there, said, "We're excited to have consistent practices and a plan moving forward." At Sandusky Elementary School, we have with us Mr. Derek Womack, who basically says, "We do it better when we do it together." Mr. Womack, can you help me with the video? We have a brief video, if we can get that moving. I'm technically challenged right now. Yes. It won't let me. Okay. All right, we'll just ask that y'all watch that video in your spare time. Mr. Womack, get me back up. And so the last slide talked about our next steps of implementation actions. With that, we still have 4 steps. The first one we've been working on is developing and aligning procedures and forms. Like I said before, that has been evident in terms of our parents' due process rights, parent-student due process rights. We've created transfer forms for students and other forms as we've reviewed these policies. We've also updated our complaints form, our bullying complaint form, And we've also updated the contact people for complaints and bullying and investigations within our policies that's available online. Number 2, training for school-based administrators and teachers as well as other staff who interact with our students. We started off the training with administrators first, informing them of the policies as we updated them, but also giving them training and showing them how to use train the trainer model so that they can grow capacity within their schools and have experts within their schools for behavior trainings and also trainings to help increase the skill deficit areas amongst their staff. We not only have trained administrators and teachers, we've reached out to the community. We've had community conversations and offered some trainings in terms of discipline and behavior language, expectations, policies, the new student conduct that's coming out soon, to broaden their awareness of where we're going in terms of LCS. We've also worked with the city of Lynchburg and conducted some trainings there in terms of PBIS and VTSS and how we are implementing our process. Number 3, communication of changes to parents of discipline practices, policies, and procedures. This is ongoing. This is an area that we definitely need to work on and get better, and we acknowledge that. How do we communicate? Do we communicate through social media, through student and parent handbooks? Are we communicating on the website or the web pages? Are we sending out flyers, brochures? And what kind of customer service are we giving them when we call them for that parent conference, parent conversation? Or do we just call and acknowledge that their child had a good day? Are we calling for the good things and the positive things and not always calling the parents when their kids are caught misbehaving or doing something that they're not supposed to do? So how do we build healthy, positive relationships with the parents and the community members? And we're going to do this through positive communications. Again, through positive communications. Lastly, the work of all work, creating handbooks, reviewing the 84 pages of the new Student Code of Conduct. This will be an ongoing process because as we're building these handbooks and we're going through these protocols, we as a division have to think about, 1, what is our mindset in regards to discipline? How do we think as a community in regards to discipline? And how do we work as one to change the mindset of our community, of our parents, and the students to let them know that we support all of them, not only in the areas of behavior, but academics and social emotional learning. With that in mind, we can continue to change our discipline disproportionality and also lower the numbers of discipline referrals. Okay. Questions?
From the board? Any statements? Dr. Coleman?
Well, LaTanya, and to your staff, it is just evident to all of us the remarkable work, intense work that goes on. And the data is very revealing in some areas. And I know time, I'm just going to yield to my colleagues, but on page 2 and 3, relative to the legislative updates that took place in the General Assembly and how that processes itself into our daily operation. We have a new committee now that Dr. Brennan is the chair of, and I certainly hope that we can begin to have conversations around what we might even want to push up to the state level around this. I know we have the Virginia Organizing Group and others who are watching this very carefully, and I just want us to be doing all that we can do as it relates to these long-term suspensions.
Say the Lincoln mission statement is excellent. So is there any way I can get a PDF file, because I'm teaching a class on strategy and I ask students to be precise, concise, and to the point when it comes to mission statement. And yours is one. So
Absolutely.
I just have some questions. One is on page, well, it's not really on page, but it's the VT, PBIS. I'm looking on number 9, page 9. Is this in place in all schools, or are we still doing cohorts, or what's?
PBIS, if it's not a Virginia tiered system of supports, if they're not under the cohort, then yes, they are doing PBIS. And so the difference is with PBIS, and Jackie, you want to come up? With PBIS, Virginia tiered system of supports incorporates your academics and your social emotional learning into that, whereas PBIS focuses primarily on behavior. So the shift is moving so we can triangulate the data and work on the student as a whole. So we want to work on their behavior, their academics, and their social emotion. And that's why we're moving to that VTS model. But the tiers and supports Universal 1, Universal 2, Universal 3, that systematic approach and that framework is still the same.
The other one is, when I first started on the school board, it would just concern me regarding the consistencies of the referrals and whether or not there's any type of, not so much rubric or guidance as to what is what and when one rises to a level of referral versus just saying, stop,
Yes, ma'am.
versus suspension versus
Yes.
something else. So have we gotten more consistent in that?
Yes. What we're utilizing more and more is called our minor major flow chart, and I can share that with you. We train at the beginning of the year our principals on that and help them to push that out through the staff. And it walks them through what a minor infraction is, and then it goes through the level of supports. And then we have a major flow chart for infractions, and that walks you through the level of supports. So, for example, you want to walk them through a minor?
So a minor infraction would be something that will be classroom managed by the teacher. So say, for instance, it was an ongoing type of behavior. The teacher had tried out different strategies with the student, documented those strategies, and then it may move up to a major infraction instead of minor behaviors getting referred to the principal when we really want them to address those in their classroom. And all of these minor major flow charts were actually devised by the schools. So it's unique to the school based on the data that exists within the school. And that's part of what we do in our PBS process, which the VTSS model is inclusive of PBS practices.
So in terms of consistency, we've been doing the training and increasing the expectation that those flow charts are followed. We put them in place so that consistency is there. Say, for example, if a behavior is going on and we notice, for example, that a student have high numbers of attendance, at what point do you contact the counselor? At what point do you contact the social worker? When do you get the attendance clerk or the administrator involved at that point? Going from a mindset of punitive to teaching, modeling, providing resources. Using the flow chart, put the resources and the support services in on the front end instead of the back end. So we're trying to change the whole division's mindset of we offer support services first through the flow chart and the chain of command before it becomes punitive within that major incident involving administration at that point.
So if a child consistently acts out, then they will be referred to a counselor before referral?
They may,
Okay.
if that's on a flow chart at that specific school site, to be referred to a counselor for supports. So ideally, we don't reach the referral status before trying everything that we can do at other levels.
Is it consistent across schools or in schools? It seems like each school has slightly different.
Correct. And so we're
Criteria.
working on that consistency piece. And so when I say boots on the ground and staff working with the supervisors, working directly and closer with the principals this year, putting that extra layer in for support for the principals in terms of help with following that flow chart, but also implementing it within the school, but also making them aware of all the supports and resources that the school division has and that's available. So this is a different mindset, different practice, and we're constantly pushing that. But that goes back to what are the division's expectations? And I can say at the beginning of the school year, we've been talking about expectations as a whole for the division and expecting everyone in leadership to follow those expectations as we push those out.
Thank you and your staff so much for working on this. It's such a huge topic and such an important thing for Lynchburg City Schools. I think everyone and the staff, particularly teachers, say that discipline is really one of the major issues that need to be addressed in the schools. And we're about to look at the Youth Risk Behavior Survey that also talks about children feeling safe or unsafe in the schools, which relates to discipline. And you've obviously accomplished a lot. You know, there's still obviously some concern in the data, like the long-term suspension rate, as far as that going up rather than going down. And I know that you're following the PBIS and VTSS protocols. There's been discussion about also the idea of restorative justice, restorative discipline. Is that something that gets factored in at some point to the process that you all are doing?
Yes, so restorative practices and restorative discipline falls under Tier 2 with advanced tiers within the VTSS models. When you're talking about restorative practices, you also have to put in our budget monies to fund it and sustain it. So those are conversations as the cohorts are moving up within the tiers. We have to put within the budget to allocate resources to make sure that when we implement these practices, we can sustain it as a division for the long haul. We don't want to, in the past, I can tell you, we've implemented a couple of things but did not have the financial backing for sustainability. Or we did not do the training long enough for sustainability or reviewing the outcome data. So we've learned from the mistakes that we've made in the past. And moving forward, we're doing the training first, getting our cohorts through Tier 1 training, implementation, having them at 80% fidelity, meaning that they're using universal strategies for all students. Then looking to move them up to the next tier of advanced tiers, which is the restorative practices, and implementing it strategically at that level.
With the restorative practices, it works, but it is personnel intensive. And it's personnel intensive in that you have to have flexibility of schedules. Sometimes those entry conferences last an hour or 2 or 3. So it's not something that a teacher can be on a committee for because they're trying to teach their class. So in places where it has worked, there have been additional personnel who act as a support resource for students, which is one of our challenges right now.
Right. And so have we done it? Yes, we've done it through the utilization of social workers and also some outside agencies.
Question. The comment was in your data, Lincoln Elementary stood out, which has a plus percentage and rest were all declining. So is there a reason for that outlier observation among all the schools?
Wait, say that again?
Lincoln Elementary appears
Yes.
to be an outlier observation among
Correct.
all the schools. So you guys go back and look at why among all other schools, this is one with a positive number. The
Yes.
discipline actions going up.
Yes. And so with Lincoln Elementary School, you've also had a change in leadership, and you had a change in leadership a couple of years ago. And looking at their preliminary data, that those numbers have already started to go down. So when you're looking at the change in leadership and somebody that has been strong with PBIS coming from their former site, the strategies that she's already starting to implement for this school year, the numbers are going down. And I can give you that information at the end of the school year. So mid-June, I should be able to have that information disaggregated to reflect that.
And the follow-up question was, would it be possible for us, at least for me, to get data on other racial groups?
Yes,
Not only black students, you presented the black students, how about the other racial groups?
yes.
Where do they stand?
On page 5, I was looking at the percentage of African-American students referred at least once. Is there any way to tease out that number exactly? Because it could be just 1 or 2 students that's pushing up that data versus, because it doesn't look good.
That is
Right.
Instead of proportion.
Right. This is not your repeat offenders.
Oh, this one. Oh,
Yes.
good God, that's even worse.
Yes, this is not your repeat
That's
offenders.
even worse. So this is at least once, okay.
This was a lot of data for us to get
59%.
tonight and to comprehend, and I know that several of us take a little bit more time to read it, and if we have questions, we can call you and send them to you, and we'll look forward to hearing about the data in June to see where we are for this school year.
Madam Chair, as we move on, I would be interested in direction from you going forward after we have been able to process this, because it is a major concern as we look at the data, disaggregate the data. How do other community groups get to weigh in on this discussion? Because I'm really interested in knowing what persons have to say and to get the thoughts and reflections going forward as it relates to this matter. We have to move on from it, but this is really a major concern across the Commonwealth, and as Bob said, certainly here within the city of Lynchburg. Looks like we're moving forward, but
And we have had some sessions this year from our community engagement on data and alternatives too. So we have set up that opportunity. We've just got to do more of it. I hear what you're saying. Kim?
This is really excellent, and I know there's a lot of data collection in this. And I'm curious, along with characteristics of the students, do you also capture characteristics of the teachers that are making these referrals, like gender, amount of experience, level of education, racial background, things like that, to look at some other factors that might affect a number of referrals or preponderance to more sensitivity to student infractions and more likely to refer? Do you capture any of that?
Our VTSS data collection and PBIS, we do look at the number of teacher referrals. In the past, we have not disaggregated the data down enough to go by the ethnicity of the teacher in those other profiles that you just said, but that's something I can discuss with Dr. Edwards. But we do have teacher information and data.
Yeah.
I do know that principals at individual schools look
They
at that
review it
information, they
monthly.
review it, and I'm sure they follow up with conversations about what occurred and it's
Correct.
continuing to occur. I do know that principals have those conversations.
And it's reviewed at the end of,
The
they
school.
get monthly data
Okay.
on that.
Dr. Nellis?
Question on the VTSS, is that going to be rolled out, is the plan to roll it out to all the schools eventually?
Yes, yes.
Is there a notional timeline?
So far, we've been rolling about 3 to 4 schools now, picking up the pace. Next year, we're gonna kind of halt it just a little bit so we can catch all the coaches up. So we can have trainers within the division to help support us, and we have people within the building with an increased expertise level. I call it boots on the ground in the school, to help us roll it out with fidelity. The key word for us is fidelity. As we're implementing it, are we providing the skill sets, the follow-up, the direction for our leadership, but also for our staff? And we want to grow that expertise within our buildings. So if you build a system approach, when someone leaves, someone else in that building can step up and take over. So it shouldn't matter if the principal leaves and goes somewhere else or retires, that school should be able to sustain itself. So we're looking for long-term sustainability for the schools to be able to know how to run teams, know how to set expectations, write mission statements, and be able to run smoothly even if the leadership in the building changes.
You know, I was going to say this is a long-term effort, and
Yes.
it's really important that the consistency is there to build on what's been done, and Lincoln's a good example of that. So.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Like I said, once we've had time to look at it more thoroughly, if we have more questions, we need to bring it back for additional review at a work session. We're more than able to do that. Next, Youth Risk Survey. Welcome.
Good evening, Ms. Morrison, Dr. Edwards, members of the board. One of the pleasures of my job in student services is to work with our School Health Advisory Committee. Our committee is made up of a number of parents and professionals in our community, and many of them are here tonight, so I'm just going to ask them to stand so you can recognize how many people are here tonight. If you all will please stand for me, the folks who are working with Health Advisory Committee.
Thank you all very much.
They are very invested in the health and the welfare of our students. There's no question about that. This evening, they're going to be presenting to you the results of the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. The survey has been done in our division since 1999 for 6th, 9th, and 12th grade students. And basically what it does for us is it gives us a snapshot of some of the risk behaviors that challenge some of our students. And it also gives us as a community and as a school division an opportunity to try and address some of those needs. The results of the survey will be presented tonight. I know that you all also have a copy of that information. And so tonight I'd like to introduce Dr. Julia Mays and also Dr. Rachel Gagan, who will be presenting that information for you. And make sure that our slides are going to run through, so we'll check on that. Dr. Mays, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here. I'm an epidemiologist, so I was put into I was suggested to present.
There's the click.
Oh, good.
To get you going, so make sure you're straight and that it's up there. Should I put on the flash drive and do it? Oh, I see. Oh, it's not talking to the screen, that's its problem. Yeah, okay.
Part of the course.
Sorry. I'm not the thinking. There it goes.
Something's happening.
That leaves you in a bit of a lurch, doesn't it? It's like, oh, great, you're ready to talk to you about something I don't have slides for.
That might not be so good.
It would be better if you had.
Well, why don't I just start by describing, so the Youth Risk Behavior Survey is a national survey that's run by CDC, and I'm really glad that Lynchburg has done it. I'm so glad to have data on our students. It's intended to really focus on the main causes of health problems in children this age. So it has 6 domains. I think they're like sexual health, tobacco, alcohol use and other drugs, diet, physical activity. I'm forgetting the last one. I forget the last one, but anyway. Safety, thank you, injury and violence. So, and our survey is intended to be giving out in all the English and history classes in every school. The teachers didn't end up doing that at every school, I guess because they felt like they just didn't have the time. So I felt like our proportions who actually answered the survey were pretty good for 6th graders and 9th graders. But for the 12th graders, it was only 42% of all students who answered it. I did look to see whether the demographics of the students that answered the survey were representative of Lynchburg City 12th graders as a whole, and they were similar. I was really concerned that maybe it was mostly at Glass, or maybe it was mostly at Heritage, and we'd really only end up getting a proportion, and I don't think it was really that far off. But I think you got to keep that in mind when you interpret the results, and I'm going to talk about that.
I was just going to give you a hard copy.
Oh,
There's
okay.
just a hard copy.
Should I roll? Let's.
Yeah. They can follow
All right.
as you go. 'cause they all
Let's
have a
roll
hard
then.
copy, so, sorry.
Anyway, okay, so let's move on, actually, straight into physical health. So the alcohol use question, there was such a big drop for 12th graders from 2015 to 2018 with regards to the first drink of alcohol prior to age 13 that I think you should really double it, that I think this is probably a result of the small subsample. But alcohol use has gone down in Lynchburg and has gone down nationally. This is in line with national trends. So even though we might question the slope of this line, I think it's probably, there's truth to the fact that it is going down. And moving on to tobacco, cigarette use dropped. Also, chewing tobacco, cigars also dropped, and even vaping dropped, and that's actually different than what's happening nationally. Nationally, a lot of substances are going down, but vaping is going up. That's what students are moving to. So it's just important to keep that in mind. But in our survey, that it did go down even among all the students for whom we feel like that the survey should be more representative. Moving on to marijuana use, that again with national trends, that also went down. And then if you go, I was really interested in differences across racial and ethnic groups. And one reason why I wanted to look at that is because we have limited resources, we want to really focus it. Oh, look at that. We want to be able to focus any kind of intervention to the group that needs it the most. So I felt like it was going to be important to be able to break it down. And I know we only have blacks and whites. The numbers of Hispanics, I just felt like was too low to really present, that it wasn't going to necessarily be statistically meaningful. And I think the numbers of Asians were also pretty low. So unfortunately, this is what I have, just blacks and whites and females and males. And what I wanted to say about this is that because I'm in the field of public health, we are so focused on vaping right now because it's new and it's different and we don't know that much about it. But I think an important point is when we focus on vaping, we're focusing on a problem among whites and among females. And it's really important to see that cigarette use continues to be high among males in particular, probably white males. Marijuana use happens to be highest among blacks. And alcohol use, again, probably white females are using the most alcohol. Next slide, please. I wanted to bring this up just to say that this is out there. I doubt that 12th graders have really dropped. I think that's unlikely. It's probably the subsample, but it's around 10 to 15%, I think, just to make you aware of it. And moving on to the next slide. Other drugs are frankly really rare. We're close to 1% for all these illicit drugs. Next slide. In the last year, has anyone offered, sold, or given you drugs on school property? Lynchburg is around 10%, which is less than the national average. Next slide. Oh, you do have what I added today. I added this today. So, again, the substance use that we are seeing might represent the smaller sample of 12th graders that completed the survey, but it's really important to note that substance use is going down nationally, and Lynchburg is in line with that. Also, Lynchburg's lower use, and frankly, I think when we think a lot about these comparisons with national data, we need to think about the demographics of Lynchburg students. Black students do tend to use fewer substances than other groups. Also, it's really important to think about economics. Does Lynchburg have a higher poverty rate than nationally? Yes. So, vaping in particular is very expensive. All these substances are expensive. But if we're doing great on vaping, it might be because our students can't afford it. And because we have so many more black students than nationally. So sleep and concentration. Really, a quite substantial proportion of students are getting less than 8 hours of sleep a night. 89% of 12th graders which is pretty alarming. And then the next question is students who report having serious difficulty concentrating because of a physical, mental, or emotional problem. That's about a third of the students. Screen time, this is 3 hours on an average school day of either video or computer games or TV watching. They don't ask about, so actually Rachel just pointed this out to me. She said, my kids don't watch TV, they watch on their phones or whatever. So I'm sure they kept this question the same in order to compare over time, to look at, this is why it hasn't been modified to include, say, watching on your phone or watching on something else on your tablet. So the proportions may seem low, but they're probably not showing all of the watching that people are doing. What I wanted to say about the question, students who describe themselves as overweight, that's really a subjective assessment. They didn't actually collect height and body weight and calculate body mass index. There's also real cultural differences in who considers themselves to be overweight, and also as in the United States, as we've had more and more of the obesity epidemic becoming a problem, more people who are overweight are more likely to describe themselves as being of normal weight. They view themselves as normal because they are normal. But so it's not, I don't think this is the best measure. I wish, and Rachel suggested this, Rachel Gagan, that we could get the numbers from the school entrance forms to actually calculate how many students are overweight. That would be informative. Wait, go back. The measure of whether students have been physically active for at least 60 minutes per day for 5 or more days, that is the goal. And a good number of the students are not meeting that goal. Over half of 12th graders and half of 9th graders. So asthma, I'm very interested in asthma. Asthma is caused by obesity, and it's also exacerbated, either brought on or exacerbated by factors related to poverty, including substandard housing, because it's set off by cockroach allergen, mold, and dust. So what you're looking at is probably a reflection of poverty. And then the other thing is that's really difficult with asthma is that when children or anyone really with asthma, they're afraid to exercise because they don't want to have an asthma attack. So it becomes a vicious circle with obesity and asthma, because obesity does make asthma worse. So we cannot control their home environments, but what we can do is just give them as much opportunity to have movement education and recess and offer them healthy food in the cafeteria. This is another difference where things are worse for the black students. The much smaller proportion is seeing a dentist in the past 12 months. I don't know if it's possible to work with providers to try to get screenings in the majority black schools to try to lift those groups up. I don't know. But this concerned me too. Mental health. So the first thing here is what the proportion of students who felt sad or hopeless every day for 2 weeks or more this past year. So the thing about depression is that it's really tied to a lot of these other factors. It's related to having physical limitations. It's related to being overweight and unhappy with your body. It's related to not getting enough sleep, and so on. So that's the challenge, is that a lot of these risk factors go together. And we're dealing with a spectrum of them. With regards to suicide, a substantial proportion of children are reporting that they seriously considered attempting suicide in the last year. And Lynchburg's numbers on suicide, I believe, were higher than national averages, if I'm not mistaken. This is the actual number who tried to kill themselves in this past year or ever in life for the 6th graders. And the numbers below 36, 37, or 14 are only of the people who answered the survey. So really the actual numbers are higher. So this is a large number. But suicide is on the rise nationally for teenagers, unfortunately. And it's rising faster. I think it's always been higher rather among boys than among girls, but it's rising faster among girls. So breaking it down across groups, suicide, both thinking about it and attempting it, is highest among females and among blacks. So it's probably the black girls who are at highest risk here. With regards to safety, this is the proportion of children who report being in a physical fight this past year, and in particular on school property, and Lynchburg is very much in line with national numbers on this. Have you been bullied at school this past year? Well, Lynchburg, I'm afraid, is doing much worse than students nationally with regards to bullying. One thing I know about bullying is that schools that are more diverse have less bullying. Schools that have no one ethnic group makes up more than 50% of the student body. So schools that have large numbers of Asians and blacks and Hispanics and everybody are the best off when it comes to bullying. And obviously we have no control over that, but I just want to give a reason why Lynchburg might be doing worse than nationally. With regards to students who were bullied at school in the last 12 months, whites and females are in the worst position here compared to males and blacks. And the only good thing about bullying is that it goes down over time. But 6th grade is pretty bad. Have you ever been electronically bullied? Lynchburg, again, is way higher than national percentages. And it looks like it's gone up since 2015 as well. With regards to ever experiencing electronic bullying, again, it's females that are in much worse position than males. So this is the percent of children who report missing one day of school in the last 30 due to feeling unsafe on the way to or at school. And it's 10% of 12th graders, which I think is pretty substantial. And when we break it down by groups, it's black girls that are most likely to report this. And by the way, I have all the breakdowns by race, ethnicity, and gender. I have that across all the questions, if you're interested in seeing that. This is the numbers that reported ever being raped or being hurt by a partner in the past 12 months. So Lynchburg's actually a little bit below national percentages here. It's hard to compare to 2015 because I feel like the Me Too movement has got to have changed reporting, as it maybe it also changed incidents of rape. So, but it's gone down in Lynchburg, so it's a good thing. This is rape across groups. I think it's important to point out that it doesn't discriminate. It's happened to males. And because you might also wonder about, because this is lifetime, you might wonder if it's related to, say, childhood sexual abuse. But there's a real difference between 9th and 12th grade. And so it's clearly happening. I'm presuming that peers are going to be responsible for a good proportion of that difference. And this is driving after drinking and texting and driving. It should be noted that, of course, not all 9th graders have a license to drive. And there may be, when you think about differences between Lynchburg and nationally, it may be related to the proportion of students who have a phone, for example, and the proportion of students who have access to a car. So I'm not sure exactly how we compare to national data on that. So, but importantly, it's nice to see that it did go down since 2015. Both of these measures did. So this is the students who reported that they were threatened or injured with a weapon at least one time this past year on school property. This basically hasn't changed, and it's the same as the national data. And this is the students who reported carrying a weapon in the last 30 days or carrying a gun not for sport. That went down slightly in Lynchburg. So 3% of students reported carrying a weapon one or more days on school property or to a school event in 2018. And then with regards to the numbers, that's of the people who took the survey, not of the total population of students. And here's the sexual health question. 18% of Lynchburg City students report being gay, lesbian, bisexual, or not being certain. And it's pretty consistent between 9th and 12th graders. So the proportion who said they had ever had sexual intercourse went down so dramatically among 9th graders from 2015 that I don't find it plausible. Also, that same group of 12th graders, the 41% in 2018, was that the same 41% in 2015? I find that, like no additional students had sexual intercourse in the last 3 years. I don't find that plausible. But sexual activity has gone down nationally, and I think that we should truly believe that it has gone down in Lynchburg because it's going down everywhere. And can you show the next slide? So you can see ever having sexual intercourse stayed pretty steady from the 1990s through the early 2000s, and really since 2013 it has started to drop, particularly among the youngest students. I mean, I guess it may have plateaued among some grades between 2015 and 2017. So even though I find our proportions a little questionable, I think we can truly believe that it is going down. And this is the proportion of students who, among sexually active students only, who said they used a condom the last time they had sex. So the good thing is that has increased, but it's still only about half of the 12th graders. And I pass it off to Rachel Gagan.
Good evening. Thank you all so much for inviting us to be here. I'm standing here as a member of your Health Advisory Board for the last 8 years, and I'm delighted to be here for the second time. I'm here because I'm passionate about health in our community and specifically our children. And the good news is that a lot of what Julia said is that things are maybe getting a little better. Speculating with Dr. Salmon, my friend back there, that maybe kids are not having sex as much because they're just texting each other. They don't want to talk to each other on the phone, and they don't even want to stay in the same room with each other because they can just text each other. The problem, of course, is that all these issues, obesity, decreased sleep, exposure to drugs, alcohol, and especially vaping, which we're going to talk about more, affect school attendance. These things affect school performance, and they absolutely affect graduation rates. And I know that that's where the bottom line is, right? We want them to get to school, we want them to perform in school, and we want them to graduate and be functioning members of our society. And so as much as I want to be brief, I've got to ask you a quick question. Raise your hand if you have read the Family Life Guidelines recently. Dr. Brennan, you're my favorite. Dr. Edwards, I respect you. I would like you to raise your hand if you think that the Family Life Guidelines focus on sex. Good job, you guys. Next slide. So one of the things, actually, can you skip to the next slide? I'm going to change my order. So one of the things I would really like to recommend, and our whole committee would like to recommend to you, is that you guys think about how you have existing guidelines that are mandated by the state for family life, which is way more than sex. And it is for each grade level, and they absolutely address all of the concerns that are in the YRBS. They address mental health, they address physical health, they address safety, and they address sexual health. And so our biggest concern is that there is not a current system to verify that family life is being taught in every single school at every single grade level, the way that they are mandated by the state. There's no SOL test, and there's no system that, in all my questioning over the past couple years, that I've dug up for us to know. We are on the honor system here. I know for a fact that I have taught the worst part, depending on your perspective, to fifth graders for the last 3 years at R.S. Payne. To my knowledge, before I made it happen, it was only happening at the Go Center. It was not happening in the base school. And it has been my delight to teach both groups, and I actually would like to teach both groups together because I think that would actually go better. But it is something that can happen if we continue to reach out to our community supporters. Dr. Brennan has helped teach it. Dr. Wright, who's here in the audience, has helped teach it. And there are people in our community who absolutely do not want to see a pregnant teenager. They absolutely do not want to see a teenager with an STD. They absolutely do not want their child to have their education interrupted because of sexual concerns, mental health concerns, physical health concerns. But we need your help. We need you to develop a system to make sure these guidelines are being taught. It's all in the guidelines. They're not the guidelines that I would have written. They include some fairly old-fashioned language that focuses a lot on traditional marriage and abstinence. And I'm not saying those things should not be covered, but I don't think that they should be covered in quite the proportions that they are written. I have talked to the Secretary of Education for Governor Northam. The guidelines are usually updated every 8 years, which would mean we still have a couple more years to go before that would happen. But he's open to the idea of some of those guidelines being updated. But for right now, they absolutely hit all the pieces that we need to hit. Can you hit the next slide for me? And so I just, went through this. The number of guidelines that exist for mental health, the raw number and the percentage, really mostly what family life focuses on, starting with kindergarten with are you special and are you loved, all the way through high school, what are you going to do with yourself? You have so much potential. Making sure the student understands that. Our family life guidelines focus on mental health. And I think if we had a verified system to know that it's being taught, then we could even look into the quality of the lesson and saying, well, if we still have all these sixth graders who are being bullied, then clearly in grades 3, 4, and 5, we need to talk more about bullying and make sure we prevent it. Physical safety is definitely a big piece of it, and sexual development obviously has to be covered, but it's really only a third of family life guidelines. Can you go back to the slide 2 things ago? Another thing that came out of, one more forward, thank you, our conversation as the School Health Advisory Board was the need for more mental health workers. We certainly, before the events of last Thursday, were already very worried about school shootings. We were already worried about victims of bullying retaliating with a gun. And the fact that in our locality, we have 5 mental health counselors for the entire division, and they circulate between schools. The American School Counselor Association recommends a 250-to-1 ratio, and the national average and our rate is 500-to-1, and I think there's no better time for Lynchburg to stand out as above the national average. Horizon Behavioral Health has been a great partner to me in my work with Live Healthy Lynchburg, and they are more than willing to give classroom presentations on mental health. It's a service that is available for free, and all we have to do is help set it up. So to provide counseling for better problem solving, self-esteem, anger management in all students, we really think that this could affect the students' well-being and sense of safety as well as the actual safety in the schools. Can you go forward, back again? And so in particular, I wanted to just pull out one example that really is front of mind for me. The existing guidelines, there's a guideline in 2nd grade where you're supposed to talk about how the media influences what you do. And we know that the Jewel Company in particular has made an effort to make something that is attractive and secret and appealing to kids. And so to be able to talk about that in 2nd grade is written out in the guidelines. It doesn't say the word Jewel because these guidelines are old, but that absolutely can be done. In 4th grade, they have a big section about drugs, and juuling certainly, and nicotine counts as a drug. 5th grade to say no to negative social behaviors, and 8th grade to cope with stress. We know that one of the reasons why kids use nicotine is to help relieve stress, and if we give them better coping skills, then that will be an alternative. Raise your hand if you have seen a Juul in person. Raise your hand if you would like me to talk more about what a Juul is. Awesome. I have a friend. This is Dr. Jay Salmon. I first met Dr. Salmon one time. He's a pathologist, and he was talking in front of EC Glass about how if everyone kept smoking, he would make more money because he dissects their diseased lungs. And the kids were like, who is this guy? What is he talking about? So a Juul in a minute.
Yeah, I will try to be as quick as possible. I know I'm not really on the agenda, but this is something that just, if it doesn't terrify you, it should. So again, as she said, I'm a pathologist. I've worked with the lung cancer program since I've been here in 2000, so almost 20 years. Early on, I was involved with the TAR Wars program, from the American Academy of Family Physicians that looks at 4th and 5th graders and helps them quit smoking. Over time, and real quick, I wanted to commend, the most difficult thing about administering that program is getting into schools. And Dr. Edwards was the one, we did tee it up for her, but she knocked it out of the park, and we administered this program to all 11 elementary schools, 33 classes last year, which was the first, and it's really important. It's really important because vaping, and particularly Juuls, is a new thing, and I don't care what the stats you just heard showed, you should be genuinely terrified. So real quick, smoking, very addictive, one of the most addictive sort of drugs or habits we can get into as humans. We are not good at getting people to quit smoking. And one of the reasons is that the cigarette is a very good delivery system for nicotine. It feels good. So when we try to use patches or gums or these other things to try to supplement that, they just don't work. So the vape was actually invented by a young man in China whose father died of lung cancer, and their incidence of smoking is significantly higher than ours. He wanted to create a nicotine delivery system that was similar to smoking but without the health risks. He did create a nicotine delivery system. Unfortunately, it was not quite as effective in its feel as smoking a cigarette, and the downsides to having it be less nasty meant that most people that try to switch from smoking to vapes will end up doing both and doing it more because now they're not prevented by the smell and all the nastiness of the cigarettes from being in public spaces. And we've seen that data play out. The people at PAX Labs studied the chemical reaction when tobacco leaves are burned in a cigarette to look at how that nicotine release affected the body. They patented that, created a delivery system that didn't just match it, but increased it. And in doing so, made the most effective and addictive nicotine delivery system ever made by man. And then, using marketing, they packaged it in a shape and size and form that would appeal to middle schoolers. And then they marketed it in a clever new way using social media, right? You never saw this in magazines. They never came to the medical community directly to middle schoolers. They knew full well that the law would not have anything to do with this, and by the time any of us knew what was going on, these kids would be addicted, and that's exactly what's happened. I've never seen, in 25 years being a physician, kids come to parents and say, who have no idea what they're even talking about, I can't stop using this thing. So all this time working with these kids, this stuff is really frightening. The kids can get really addicted very quickly. They can power down the equivalent of a pack of cigarettes in like 2 minutes. And this is poised to be a national disaster, I think. Most of us don't even really know what's going on. We have no idea how to stop it. I'm being asked, what do we do to get kids off? And the answer is we didn't know how to get adults off tobacco when they wanted to quit smoking. So this is something we really need to prevent. This program that you helped put in, we've got to do that, and we need to at least educate middle school kids and all our staff and all their parents about what this is and what the danger of it is before they're addicted, because we're not going to be able to figure out how to get them off.
So imagine a mechanical pencil, the refill for the lead. It's not lead anymore, graphite. Imagine that size container, so smaller than this.
Well, this looks
It
like a
can
USB
fit in a
drive.
sleeve. It can fit in a bra, and a girl can just put her mouth in her shirt and then look up, and she's just Juuled in your classroom right in front of you. No smoke comes out of her mouth, and she just essentially got high. And the data that we presented on the survey, we're just going to say, was self-report, which when it comes to obesity, we know is not accurate. When it comes to sexual activity, we hope that the people who are bragging and the people who are not admitting cancel each other out. But the data on vaping, it just cannot be true at all. Every single high schooler that I talk to in my pediatric practice, I say, what's going on with vaping at your school? And the answers for Heritage, Glass, Rustburg, Appomattox, every single one of them say, every time I go to the bathroom, there are at least 10 people vaping. And they're vaping on the big mechanisms, bigger than this. And then the juuling, I don't think they even know because everyone's doing it in class. So it's something that we need you all to do the best you can to come up with a vaping policy for the schools. But I have talked to Dr. Edwards about this already. It's not possible for you all to exist in a vacuum. And the next thing that Dr. Salmon and I are going to be doing is talking to the city council and talking about a vaping policy for the city. Because essentially to me, every time I drive past a vape shop, I imagine someone selling crack cocaine. It is dangerous. There have been reports in the news of kids ending up in the hospital because, again, a huge dose of nicotine like that to a child's growing heart can put them in cardiac arrest. So this is something that is hugely important for us to try and get on top of because, unfortunately, our kids know more about it but don't understand it. They're not good at making short-term decisions. But the summary of what I want to say is I think Dr. Sam has done a great job with Tar Wars. We need to expand that and do more in the middle schools because certainly what we hope the state is doing by increasing the age will make it a little less available. But one of the data points in here is that most kids are getting their vape product from someone else. They're not buying it themselves. So changing the legality of them buying it is not really going to affect them. There's still going to be an adult who has poor ethics who's going to give it to them. And so that's where the problem lies. But my hope is that you don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel. You have these family life guidelines, and they just need to be implemented. And it needs to be like going to gym class, which is movement, sorry. It needs to be like our requirements for English and for math. And honestly, Dr. Salmon and I are both sitting here. We went through 12 years of school and then 4 years of college and then 4 years of medical school. We would be happy for you not to teach math for an entire year and just to teach family life. That's how important it is. We know you're not legally allowed to do that, but we have to figure out a way that this becomes more important. This needs to be not left until the end of the year. But even if it is left until the end of the year, my 7th grader told me today that they're going to watch movies for the next 6 days in school. And if they're going to watch movies, let's pick some good ones. And there are all kinds of resources out there to be talking to kids about safe sex, tobacco, mental health, and our School Health Advisory Board is more than happy to meet with you again and again, not just tonight, to help solve this problem.
I would leave with one comment is that, so I'm a healthcare provider, but I'll tell you that healthcare is much more about the health of your community than is on delivery of healthcare. I mean, that's not where the answers are. It's not going to be in the hospital. And the health of your students, I know we think about academics all the time, and I know that's your primary focus. The health of your students is more important than their academic achievements. So that's all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Wow. Thank you all so much. I'm first sorry that you did not get a larger senior participation, and I'm sure that we will make that correction in the future. But the information is very helpful. Thank you, Ann. Dr. Brennan.
I just want to thank some of my colleagues who are here tonight. Dr. Gagan, who's been so involved with not just Lynchburg City Schools, but the city as far as our health goes, and Dr. Salmon and Dr. Wright, Dr. West, who's sitting back on the back row. I'm so sorry that Jane White left because I think she's been a very active member of the Health Advisory Committee. And in fact, when I was put on the board 2 years ago, she called me about a weekend as being very concerned about the rate of intercourse in the LCS schools at age 75 or something. So I think she's a great lady to support us. I just want to comment just very briefly. As people know, I'm an infectious disease physician, so I'm very interested in infectious disease, including sexually transmitted diseases. And although I'm glad that sexual intercourse has gone down, there's still like 46% of our students that are sexually active. Less than half of them actually use some type of protective measure, which is just a problem. 10% of them are being tested for HIV, which is good because Southeast Virginia has such a high incidence of HIV in the heterosexual population. So I think we're heading in the right direction, but we still have a lot to do. And then last, I just want to comment that the cyberbullying thing, I think, is such an issue that needs to be addressed by us in an active way. We've all heard stories of children who have killed themselves because in middle school or in elementary school because of cyberbullying, particularly women. And Ms. Morris and I attended a VSBA conference about 6 months ago or so where the there was a suicide in the schools that then triggered a huge program for them to work with the whole school. And I just hope that we can be proactive and work on that beforehand.
I do too.
But thank you all very much for all the work that's been done on this.
And I think the cyberbullying, we sit on a lot of discipline committees, and we see in the referrals where students are reporting the type of bullying, and the social media leads to a lot of disagreements and fights in our schools because of what goes on the social media. Any further questions or comments? Dr. Coleman?
Dr. Edwards, where are we, since to my knowledge this was recently done in the General Assembly with the one counselor per 250 kids? And I know there hasn't been a lot of money to back that up from the state for that piece. Where are we with
They
that?
are phasing that in, so we are moving to 375 and then into 250.
Okay,
so.
that answers my question. Now, with all of this wonderful reporting, it had to be eye-opening, and I see the solutions. If at a later point we're going to talk about how all this gets phased in, and to recognize the dilemmas for African American girls. That's and things like the dental piece. I certainly hope we will use our community and take all of this very seriously, because you can't educate a kid if all of these dynamics are at play.
Further questions or comments? After reviewing this and watching their presentation, if you have additional comments or questions, Ann Bongendry would be happy to assist us to get to the right point. I do think we have to look at our family life guidelines and look at where we're doing it. The idea that students are going to be spending the last 6 days of the school year watching movies is appalling to me, and I certainly know that someone will be following up on that as well. As a former building principal, that really...
Madam Chair, so to that point, what is the direction? I just want to make sure I understand without getting into the weeds. When will we hear back concretely what's going to happen for the next school year? This school year is of course, almost in the history books.
Yes.
So first, let me thank the School Health Advisory for all of their work, and it's nice when you do the presentation and I don't have to. It just speaks to the community involvement and the level of commitment that you have for our students. So I certainly appreciate that. And again, teeing it up to me for, when we started the TAR Wars, that was just the open door to let's use our community expertise to help our kids. One of the things that we realize, and if you're your average third grade teacher, you're probably feeling overwhelmed that you have so much to do and so much to teach and so much to be held accountable for. And this is one of the areas where, as Dr. Gagan says, if we can use our community partners to help us deliver some of these lessons and take the burden off of the classroom teacher as being responsible for, again, trying to plan for that. The challenge on our end, as Dr. Salmon said, is arranging it and making sure that it's consistent across buildings. Going back to what Ms. Brown said, fidelity and consistency is really where we are. And in the School Health Advisory, we've talked about family life curriculum and what's not there. I know the work that we have to do. As a matter of fact, I'm glancing back at Dr. Bruce because she knows that we've had a conversation about our next steps in terms of where we're going into the next school year with working with the family life curriculum and getting that where it needs to be, because that is an important part. The other thing that I think that is worth noting is that, and I know that they've said it, it's a community problem, particularly with cyberbullying, because much of that, and if you've been a principal in schools, usually on Mondays, it's the result of what happened over the weekends. And if you have a break in between, oh boy, when we come back. And cyber doesn't sleep. So it's all day, every day, morning, noon, night, midnight. And it may actually be some of the reasons why our kids aren't getting sleep, because their devices are next to their beds and on, and buzzing and beeping and calling their attention to, let me just look at this. So that is a big one that we have to take on, that's a little bit more challenging, but definitely worthwhile in terms of what we do.
And I would also put out there that we've talked in the past about start times for our students in the high schools and the middle schools and the elementary schools, and that impact on sleep. That should still, and I think, be part of the conversation.
And Madam Chair, not calling out any names, but in our community, we have several persons who have done an outstanding job in rearing their children to deal with life in the midst of all of these challenges. And some of the problems that we are having is because persons who have that significant task of parenting and or being in the community to nurture kids do not have the information they need or the exposures they need to do it right. I want to encourage those persons to come up to the plate and document and help us share that in the communities, because I see one of the next steps going forward where the board might be able to help is getting into these neighborhoods and doing some of the hard work to increase the capacity of individuals to know how to help their kids or the people that their kids are interacting with around some of these areas. And that is something that is probably not as easy to get a handle on, but I think it will be equally as a part of taking the burden off of the classroom teacher in dealing with these social problems.
Dr. Brennan's hand went. Sure.
My concern also is with bullying, just the regular standard bullying. And, you know, you get tired. I know some of the students, I know they have to get frustrated with just hearing, you know, just ignore them.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times they can't. And the fact that now some parents have to drive their children to school because they're bullied on the bus. So, you know, we really need to have a way to target how we're going to address bullying and what do we do when a child comes and says they're being bullied. Because suicide is on the rise, and sometimes children act out different ways too, not so much as suicide, but other ways. Especially if they don't think anybody's hearing them or listening.
Dr. Brennan?
No, thank you.
Oh, you didn't have a comment?
No.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all once again for that presentation and for what you do for us. It's greatly appreciated. Okay, that leads us to number 4, reallocation of some funds for salary and benefits for transportation.
Yes. So, as you recall, Mr. Beckles sharing with you that we have been budgeting for claims all year long, and he has been reporting that, I believe, at each board meeting, knock on wood, that we've had a pretty healthy staff and we have not had any major claims. And when we don't have any major claims, the money that we budgeted for those claims kind of sits there to the end of the year, which is where we're here, where we have the option to reallocate some of those funds to meet some of the other needs. I also shared with the Finance Committee, in particular, we are shifting the way that we approach funding, and it's a chore in that there has been a practice for certain departments to pretty much wait to this time during the school year to get funds to meet some of the obligations and goals and things that are in their departments. And we see that when it comes to buying buses, we see that with maintenance issues, we also see that in technology, and I like to call it a wait and get. Wait and see if we have some money left at the end of the year, or if there's a fund balance that rolls over into the next year so that you can meet these needs. What we're proposing going forward is to kind of eliminate the wait and get, but the current year we're still in wait and get. The budget was done prior to my arriving last year. We inherited it, but we are switching what we're doing right now. The buses, and I know Dr. Nillis had an opportunity to go tour the bus area are something that we need. And as a matter of fact, in the previous study, there's a recommendation that we try to purchase 8 buses to keep replenishing them so that they're not very, very, very old. So this request is to really replace some of our older buses such that we can have our fleet up and running.
Finance committee, the number was shared, and I was not able to jot down. How many buses are non-EPA compliant? And there was a number presented. I'm not sure whether it was 20, 23, what was the?
We got Mr. Garcia Blanque here to answer all those questions.
So how many, you shared couple of numbers, 15 years or older, and how many are non-EPA compliant?
Okay, good evening. We have 34% of our fleet are older than 12 years. Out of them, 12% of our fleet do not comply with 2002 EPA regulations.
Could you do the absolute number instead of percent?
Okay, it's 12 buses.
12 buses.
Right now, it's 12 buses that do not comply with EPA standards.
And that's 12 before the 8?
That's the 12 that we have right now.
So after we replace this 8, I'm assuming this 8 will go into replacing those 12 non-EPA.
Yes, sir.
So we'll still be left with 4 buses,
Right.
which are non-EPA compliant.
We have 12 buses. If I remember correctly, it's 8 buses for regular education and 2 buses for special need. That makes 10 buses. So it's 8 buses for regular education and 2 buses for special needs with wheelchairs that we're gonna replace. So that will leave 2 buses that I can put them as the extreme backups, meaning that they will be parked to the side and only used when everything else fails.
So of the 14, we would be looking at replacing 10.
Yes, as a matter of fact, some of them are already in disrepair that they have been moved for more than 6 months.
Okay, Dr. Gupta.
This is my personal concern. I would say, let's put a budget for additional 2. No kid should be traveling in any bus which is not EPA compliant in extreme or non-extreme situations.
But those 2 are not being used.
Yes, they are, at this point, they are not being used.
But, so Dr. Gupta is saying, is there a point that we would have to use them?
Right now, the way that the fleet is set up, it will have to be a major catastrophe for us to go down into that point to use it. We have enough spare buses on the size that we have. And again, this replacement is 1-to-1. We are not adding any more buses. My plan is not to grow the fleet, at least for the next year and a half, if not 2 years. So we're gonna be drawing down some older buses without even replacing them as soon as we get the new information for the new school year. So I would appreciate the fact that you are offering me to get an additional 2 buses. I'd love that idea, but right now, I would not be doing my job correctly if I take you on that, because I think that with the proposal that we have right now, we can manage, and I can 99% guarantee that those 2 buses will not be used again.
Dr. Nellis?
I'm going to move to approve this request for reallocation for transportation.
All right, we've been moved and second. Is there further discussion? Dr. Nellis?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to go through the transportation facility, and Mr. A's hosting of me was considering the number of buses and the space available at that facility. It's pretty cramped, but it was organized, and I felt sorry for the mechanics in the bays. They don't have much room to work. But I was on, I think, one of these buses that's going to be replaced. It was a 17-year-old bus with 200,000 miles on it.
That's correct.
So he also on here, which we haven't talked about, is the GPS system that's going to go on to the buses.
Right.
There was a show that gave me a preview of that, and it's pretty remarkable what the capabilities of that is.
That's, parents can
Really
find out
is.
where their buses are.
And I think bus drivers probably won't like it because Big Brother's over their shoulder the whole time, but it will provide a lot of capability, understanding where the buses are, and fleet maintenance, anyway, so.
There's also one activity bus on here, too. Right. Dr. Gupta? Dr. Coleman?
All right, and this is refreshing to know that we are getting this close to being in compliance. My only question along the path you were going is that the number of buses that we will have in compliance will be satisfactory to deliver every child to the best of our ability to school on time, back home on time, etc.
No, because we're short of drivers.
It's not
That's
the buses.
another problem,
It's the
completely,
drivers.
completely separate.
And
Right now,
I understand that, but I simply wanted, and I know it's the driver issue, but I just want to make sure that that is.
if I have the drivers, they will be on, all childs will be traveling on buses that are compliant with EPA standards. Is that what you were asking, Dr. Coleman?
Yeah, I guess so. At the same time, you feel as though that is enough to do what you need to do in terms of your fleet.
Yes, sir. Right now, at this point.
And we don't need to be exploring anything otherwise with finding other vehicles in the city that can help us to transport kids and so forth, from your perspective.
Right now, even though with the shortage of drivers, we have been able to manage. There have been some kids who are late, but that is trying to run almost 100 routes when you need 100 drivers with an average of 82 drivers on a day showing.
I support this motion.
Dr. Gupta?
The average age of buses, as we see the national data or local counties.
I don't have that, but I'll be more than glad to give you that.
The reason I asked that question is we have 22 buses still 15 years or older in our fleet. So is that a normal or is it abnormal observation?
It depends. It goes from state to state. There is not a federal mandate. The industry standard is anywhere between 12 to 15 years, and 12 being the sweet number, because the probability of you needing to replace an engine or a transmission on on older buses goes up by 30%. And if you consider that a Cummins engine on our buses will cost me about $22,000, or a transmission will cost me $17,000 to replace, or on a bus that it already has close to 200,000 miles and it's 13, 14 years old, it's a decision of, do I have those funds, or do I better put it to the side and try to get a newer bus? Also, the bus industry does update their technology in about 18 months to every 2 years. So the older the buses, the older the technology that you have to transport the kids, and that includes on the safety ends and on the emissions. Like, for example, anybody who has diesel fuel vehicles right now need to deal with DF, diesel emission program, which is something that older buses don't have. So that's all these new technologies that are available to newer buses. So.
But these 11 buses are what you feel we need at this point?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. We ready to call to question? All right. Everybody in favor? Aye. Any opposed? You got your buses.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next, capital improvement projects. This deals with the building of 2 gyms that were allocated by the city and their capital improvement plan, right?
Yes, correct. And this was on the last agenda that we had. There was discussion about the gyms during the Finance Committee. At the last meeting, you asked that we have a conversation at Finance, which we did. And the recommendation was to bring it back to the work session for discussion and approval. So.
Is there any discussion regarding this?
Put it on the motion first so we don't break.
I didn't hear you.
You want to put a motion for this and then have the discussion, or you want to have?
You can do it both, you do it both ways. So is there a motion?
I'll move to approve.
Second? Right. Call for discussion? Dr. Gupta?
So going back to the Finance Committee discussion, if my memory is correct, we were told July 1st we can have a third gym, and in September we can have a fourth gym.
I don't believe we discussed the fourth gym. We did discuss the third gym. We will be getting an additional $1 million funding on July 1st. And I will be bringing to this board further details to ask where you would like me to build that gym in the future. But based off of the current costs that we see for 2 gyms, I don't forecast that we'll have enough funding for a fourth gym right now.
So that third gym will be the third gym we had in the original CIP to the city, or will that be a brand new location?
That will be brought to the board to decide. I'm going to request that you tell me where you want me to build it.
And Madam Chair, since time is moving on, the motion is on the floor. I just want those who are in the Finance Committee, I'm not expecting you now to give us a report of what happened, but that's what I was under the impression that I was going to hear from the Finance Committee, yea or nay, in terms of your thoughts about this matter. Then the motion is on the floor, and I'm still curious about that.
Members of the Finance
I did notice that.
Well, for extra, just hold on, wait a minute.
For extra discussion, we realized that this was already, we had talked about it, and this was in the works, and Dr. Copeland was able to show us exactly where the plans were. There were several gyms: Bedford, Sheffield, Perrymont, Heritage Elementary, and because of the two, Bedford Hills and Sheffield, it was just easier to place them there. Yes.
And the prototype that we can use.
Once we make one design, then that design will carry on to the others, and so we were.
And so they're comfortable bringing this from the
Yes.
Finance Committee.
Yes, we were.
Very good.
All right, so we're ready to call to vote. All in favor of approving the plan to add gyms at Bedford Hills Elementary School and Sheffield Elementary School?
Aye.
Aye. Any noes? All right. Dr. Gupta?
I'm voting no because, again, when I was in Finance Committee, I said, on record, you'll tell me third and fourth gym, where will it be? And when we come to this, I heard about the third, but not the fourth.
Okay.
But that day, both gyms were brought up. Number 2 is, with cities' redistricting plan, again, looking back, is it $1.5 million worth spending now, or should we hold on for later on? So
When we talked with
just wanted to clarify.
city leaders, that they were in favor of moving forward with the gyms. Okay. That then takes us to, I can't read, pay schedules, fiscal 20 and budget approval. This is for discussion only. The next 2 items tonight are for discussion. Correct?
Yes, and a little bit of guidance
Okay.
for us, but they will be on the agenda for June 4th. If all goes well, City Council will vote for the final vote for the budget on May 28th, which will allow us to adopt our budget on June 4th. And when we adopt our budget, in our budget will be the pay schedules and everything going forward. So we're having a discussion about pay schedules, even though we have a budgetary number that you're going to be adopting, but I think the discussion was the how are we allocating funds in terms of the pay schedule. So we did, as you all know, get the additional funds from City Council, $862,000 to go towards the 5% increase, which was the governor's new amount after we had already made arrangements within the level funding to get 3% or 3.67%. So the additional funds, it was my recommendation, and I think I shared this all with you, how to distribute that amongst the existing pay schedules. And those would be the pay schedules that you approved in December when you approved them to be included as a part of the budget. So the first step was we had a discussion with the Finance Committee with, are you okay with us distributing the funds with about a 1.5% of it going towards the teachers' pay schedules, 1.8% going towards the classified and the transportation pay schedules, and 1% going to the admin pay schedules. And we had a discussion about that at the Finance Committee, and there was also a discussion about living wage. So what we did was we applied the 1.5, the 1.8, 1.8, and the 1.0 to the pay tables that you had already approved. So salaries went up. And then after we did that, we looked at how many staff were still below living wage. Now in December, according to MIT, living wage was $11.11 when we made our decisions. Since then, we revisited it. I think it was December 30th. It might have been updated to $11.28, which is where it is now. So what you have before you, and I've asked Marie to join us, are two very long handouts. One says item A and item B, and you might want to get some real estate so you can spread them out a little bit. And then you also have a sheet that says things to consider for sheet A and sheet B. So let me tell you what we did, and then Marie can get into the details a little bit more. Item A, you'll see are there are the pay schedules for part-time bus assistants, some custodial maintenance, instructional assistants. The titles are there, as you can see that. And what I want to point your attention to is if you go midway through the column, you'll see the number of hours per day for each position, the FTE, whether it's full-time or part-time, 0.75 is a part-time position, and then their current salary hourly rate right now. So that's what they make currently. So that's the FY19. And the step that they are proposed to be on, if we were to do the 1.5, 1.8, 1.8, 1.0, that would be the next column that says FY20 hourly 5.1%. So what we did in essence is say, if you approve the superintendent's recommendation to apply the additional funds that we received from council plus some funds that we also contributed, that would be the new hourly rate. So if I take the first person on the list, currently they're making $9.54. The new hourly rate would be $10.32. But the Finance Committee discussion was about, could we get people closer to or above, at or above living wage? So we ran multiple options, and I just want to say thank you to Marie's team, Anthony's team, and Sarah, Diane, and all of the folks who were behind closed doors running these two options so that you can see the differences. And then I'll let Marie now take over and give you a little bit more detail about the options, and then we'll get to things you can consider.
Okay. The two different scenarios you have, item A is the first thing we looked at was close to. So employees are either just below, we looked at $11 because we thought that's a good first step. So everybody, all the 85 people were either just below $11 or just over $11. We picked something on the pay scale we didn't want to change our pay scales, we currently existed. So as you can see, with the current pay scale we have, somebody would be at $10.32. With the close to living wage, that person would go to $10.95. So we took all 85 people and we did that similar thing with them, and sometimes we'd have to pick between two different things on the pay scale, and we get as close to the $11 as we could. So at the bottom line, the amount that it would cost us to do that is $74,000.
So in some cases, you'll see a person who, they're on step 2 right now, they would jump up to step 10. So they would go 8 steps up on the pay scale to get to that point.
Right, and that's one of the things you'll be considering soon, because it's very important to look at the step that we have them on now. And because we actually did a lot of this individually, especially with class, we looked at people individually and their experience to place them where we felt like they needed to be. And when we had to move the pay schedule up, or the hourly rate up, then as you can see, we kind of eliminated a lot of that. So there are gonna be people from 0 to 8 steps, or 0 to 10 steps, or 0, sort of like we've just had in the past. The second scenario that we ran, because we wanted to have one that met your criteria specifically, because the living wage, we wanted to see what it would look like. So we put everybody at least at 11.28. And we just so happened to have, or above. So we happened to have an 11.28 on our pay schedule. We didn't create that. We got lucky and there was one on there. So that's why you'll see several people on there, but as you'll also look, the step that they go to is gonna be step 8. And when you get down to custodians, they're gonna jump to step 12. So you're gonna have people with 0 experience or 10 years experience going to step 12. And the bottom line cost of all of this is, I know you're looking at that, this is like $120,000. But the things to consider are very important that goes along with that. So I don't want you to me go there. Okay.
Well, let me just make sure that we're clear. So whether you choose A or B, one being about 75,000, one being 120, it's $120,000 additional to the $1 million that we were, well, we had asked council for $1 million, but it's $1 million that we needed to get us up to the 5%. So this is additional money.
Just to have a clear context of conversation, you mentioned 800 is given by council, 1.03 million was what we needed, but the conversation started that we have $2.2 million excess this year. That may be 3.2, but that's one-time expense. And the other context of conversation is that we were thinking of reducing the health reserve from $1 million to 800. That'll give us an ongoing $2.4 million going forward. The 2.4 ongoing means could be used as a fixed cost for salaries. I just wanted to clarify, that's the context of all this conversation.
Yeah, just make one, it's not the health reserve we're gonna reduce, it's the health budget.
Budget will be reduced, yes. So the budget will be reduced, so this is one time was 2.2 to anyway $3.2 million we'll have this year, on top of everything we have spent so far. And then we could, I'm again using the word could have, another $2.4 million next year on an ongoing basis if we decide to go in that direction. Just wanted to make sure that context of conversation is clear.
Are these people, at least the full-time, benefits eligible, and how does that factor into the overall cost?
That we did not, the cost that you're seeing does not include any increase in benefits. We simply ran their contract amount.
So their benefit, what we're obligated to pay in terms of benefits would remain constant, or?
No, it would increase with that number.
Okay, and you don't have what that means.
That would be about 35%.
Well, you're just gonna have FICA, BRS, and those, so that could be about 26%. So be the number here plus 26%.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Rebecca, was that what, 22%? What was the amount?
26.
26%.
Sorry if I wasn't clear. 26.
Sure.
26%.
So the second thing, in addition to the numbers, because first we wanted to see what would it cost to get close, that's item A, or everybody at or above, so you have the cost. And then the second thing that we wanted to look at, well, what are the implications of doing this? So we went back to, and I recall when we had our X chart with all of our goals on it, things that we wanted to accomplish when we were first doing the pay tables. One of the things we wanted to accomplish was having a 0 step for experience. Another thing, in our old guides, we had repeating steps. It was important for the board at that point to eliminate repeating steps. We also, in the early guides, I'm talking about what we did in December, we moved people based on experience. We moved some folks based on comparable experiences. So this sheet, which Maria is going to go over with you, will talk about some of the things that you need to consider as should you choose either of these options, actually.
When I added the sheet I just gave you, it hit me that it would help you to see how each scenario is going to change the difference between a couple of the scenarios that we ran. So at the very bottom, you'll see that right now, the difference between a bus assistant and a bus driver is $1.49. The expectations for what their job duties are, for what they do, there needs to be something that buffers between what that is. For an IA1, which is to be qualified for an IA1, you have to have 60 college credits or have taken a para-prep. To be an IA2, you either have to have an associate degree, a bachelor's degree, or higher. So the degree piece is very significant with that. Custodians, what we compared here were the head custodians and just a custodian that starts in just as somebody in a building. And you'll see why I brought those in a few minutes. Secretary 1 and a Secretary 2, the difference currently is $1.03. So at the very top, with the close to living wage, a brand new bus assistant would come in with 0 to 6 years experience now, and they're going to come in on step 6, no matter what their experience is, if it's 0 years or 6 years, and they're going to be making $10.95. A new bus driver will come in with no experience, and he's going to start on step 0, he or she, and they'll be making $11.49, a difference of 54 cents now instead of $1.49. So your new IA is going to come in, again, you've got the same experience things because we just repeated our steps like we were trying to avoid. And they're going to come in on step 6 at 11.08, and your IA2 with no experience is going to be at 11.48, a difference now of only 40 cents. The new custodian is going to have 0 to 10 years experience, and they're going to start on step 10 at 11.09. Your new head custodian at the same level, at a 1, which is our elementary school, so our head custodian 1, with 0 to 3 years experience is going to be at 11.33, a difference of 24 cents. A new Secretary 1 with 0 to 6 years experience will start on step 6, making $10.98. A new Secretary 2 with no experience will start at 11.37 and only be a difference of 39 cents. Now, something that's really important with this scenario is we also looked at what's going to happen next year. So even though all of these people were either right below or right above $11, which is not quite living wage yet, but next year, as you know, we've planned, everybody's going to step. So they start on the new scale this year, and then the next year they move to the next cluster. So they're going to take a step. And every one of the 85 people would be at least at $11.28, which is your living wage. So we...
Are you finished?
I mean, if you let me get the bottom piece?
Yes,
okay.
please.
Okay. The at or above living wage adjustments is a little more significant, and these are only the ones we pulled out. So I'm pretty sure there are going to be things we'd run into that we don't know. The new bus assistant with up to 8 years experience will start on step 8, and they're going to be making $11.28. Your new bus driver is going to be making $11.49, a difference of 21 cents. Your new IA with up to 8 years experience will start on step 8, making $11.39. A new IA2 starting at step 0 is going to be making $11.48, a difference of 9 cents. And that's from the $1.25 that is on the pay scales now. New custodians with up to 10 years experience, we had to move them all the way to step 12 to get them to living wage. And your head custodian is now going to be making 15 cents less than that. So you'll have a supervisor in a building making less than the people they are supervising. The new Secretary 1 with 8 years' experience will come in on step 8 at 11.29. A new Secretary 2 will start on 0 at 11.37, a difference of 8 cents. Questions?
Just a quick question, Ms. G. So what happens under the step system in the following years with those differences? Do they stay the same, or does the experience individual go up
We
higher?
won't be able to fix the experience. We just eliminated how we put people on a step based on their experience, because I just took somebody with 0 experience and put them on step 12. It's really hard. We've been trying to make that up since I've been here, and
Sure.
this is the way to do it, where the new pay schedule.
So that's right. My question is, so that difference will stay the same over the years? That difference that you're alluding to here will stay the same, or will it
Well,
change?
it
Depends on the
depends.
scales, because
That's right.
remember, each of the scales have, the increment between steps might be different. So you might get to a year where the difference is 3%, you might get to a year where the difference is 2% or 1%.
That's right.
So it
It
depends.
just depends on.
Okay, thank you.
If I'm understanding correctly, so in a sense, what you did was, we have this range of pay income. So if you're brand new, no experience, you're at the bottom of the range. If you have lots of experience and more responsibility, you're at the top of the range. All you did was bring up the bottom. You didn't adjust the top. Is that correct?
This was when we were in the finance committee, we were asked to just fix the 85 people. See what that would do.
Okay.
To just fix the 85 people.
All right, I just wanted to make sure
Yes,
I
ma'am.
understood that.
We did not adjust all, yes. Typically, you adjust all the scales.
Everybody
not because you
accordingly.
have to.
Right.
That
So you
cost
have
was.
a wage compression now.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Nellis?
And I understand there'll be, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I didn't look at it. I thought I was the next.
Dr. Nellis, I'll
So when the new secretary comes in at step 6, they're not staying at step 6 for 6 years.
No, sir.
They're
No, sir. They would move on the clusters just as everybody else would.
I mean, we're running into the same thing we did back in December, and you
We did.
shift one scale and it blows up the linkages across
So
all
we'll
categories.
actually have steps on the pay schedules now that we won't use.
Dr. Gupta?
I'm not very familiar with steps.
Yes, sir.
As I said in the finance committee, look at from a human perspective. These are all members of our community, and we know many of them are below living wages. And it takes incremental steps to reach our ideal place. Ideal place is where you have the right steps, right amounts of differentials. But this will maybe a first step forward in lifting people up who we know are not making wages which are livable wages. So this could be a step forward, recognizing that we may have more resources to fix it in a bigger and larger scale. But we have to start someplace. And as I said, this could be the starting point. I mean, step in the right direction.
I'm going to tell you that I agree with you
And
wholeheartedly.
I thank you for all the work you have done. I know
it's been
this
a lot.
has
Thank
been
you.
a lot of work for you to do.
But if you will consider what we did with the pay schedules, to me, that's our best first step. We just fixed something that has been very difficult for people when I'm trying to hire them now. And I agree with you. I would love to put everybody I could at where nobody that works for Lynchburg City Schools has to do a second job. That would be my dream, but I don't see that. So I think the little steps we're taking toward what we're doing for our employees is very important. And I don't want to step back from what we just accomplished.
Because going back to, you said supervisor will be making less than the custodians.
Yes, sir.
So there may be one supervisor and 5 or 6 custodians, and or fewer, maybe fewer supervisors but more custodians. So at least we are lifting more people up. 1 or 2 needs to be lifted further up based on where they are, and that could be step 2.
Right. It's very
Phase
hard.
2.
It's very hard to talk somebody into taking on a supervisory position if you know that there are people that I'm hiring that are making more than you, and they're the people you're supervising.
Wait a minute, wait.
They wouldn't have 0 years experience, would they?
Depends. They could come from something else they have some kind of an experience. We have to start our scale somewhere.
But wouldn't you account,
That
don't we account
experience.
for their experience?
We do, but sometimes even in our school system, they may have 2 years experience. They may be a terrific custodian, and they're going to take on a head custodian position because they're really great at what they're doing. If I'm starting the rest of the people on step 12, my head custodian may only have 3 years experience.
I think we just presented this information to you so that you would have knowledge, because part of the work that you did up until December was to eliminate repeating steps. We didn't want people with 1 year, 5 year, and 8 year making the same amount. So what I asked Marie to do was just to kind of pull out a few scenarios so that you can make an informed decision about, what the board wants to do, but at least understand some of the implications.
Dr. Brennan. Sharon, I'll get to you.
Very interesting conversation, because it really goes back to our starting with the salaries back in the summer, and this issue of the living wage came up at that time, and we've been through a number of different scenarios to talk about it, and I think this has been such a helpful presentation that you've done, and the decision by the Finance Committee not to bump everybody up, so let's just take those people who have the need, because that cost was more than $2 million to do that. Now we're talking about a cost that's much more reasonable, and I think there's a lot of commitments we want to make to the staff, but to be able to say that employees of Lynchburg City Schools all get living wage is great, and it's different than other school systems are doing. And I think that the problem with them being so close is that we need next to get into the idea that all our staff are getting more competitive salaries in general. Everybody's got to move up, and that's going to be what are our next goals.
And sustaining that movement.
And sustaining that movement.
Sustaining
I don't
it.
think it's a problem that we're bringing these people up and they're close, because I think everybody needs to move up, and I think it's wonderful that we could do this first step.
Sharon, thank you, Bob.
And also, I think you just said that you won't have any initial steps, or is it possible we can change these steps? I mean, we not so much change them, but we can change the number from 8 to 1, or we have all these 8s. Is that possible to or you have to, because it seems like
change the
we're
whole
going from
pace.
4 to 12, and that people are making this huge leap, but in actuality, are these steps like so cemented that they can't, if we're because usually we get these tables, different ones, we get the IAs, the buses, the different ones, so can we change the steps in the different ones versus changing all of the steps? Because it just seems negative that it seems like we're moving people, and now we're going to have people upset because maybe 1 or 2 are going to be squished close, but we are trying to give everyone the best step up. And we can look at the head custodians and any of the ones that are tricky and see how we can work with them. Because this is such a great opportunity to really elevate everyone, but it just seems like, and then people may be listening and saying, well, wow, they're moving from step 3 to step 12, and where are we moving on the teacher's scale?
But you're looking at.
But it's not apples to apples,
right.
We're looking at different things, so that's the only thing.
If I could remind the board about the work that was done
I know
between October and December.
Knocking the work.
That was focused on getting everybody on the right experience step and fixing the repeating steps. So that goal was accomplished, and it's not as simple as just plucking one out and fixing that one.
I realize
because
that.
then it does have a ripple effect into other areas that might be on that same scale. Because if you'll look at this piece of paper, the other piece of paper where we talk about the scales and who's on what level, you can see that there's more than one employee group on a specific level.
Well, then we can look, there's other options, variables. You got 0 to 6, some have 0 to 8. So who sets those experience criteria? Are they set by some type of standard? Are we setting those so we can, like you have new custodians, 0 to 10 years of experience?
Well, that would be because we had to move, when we looked at the 0 to 10, every one of those were below the living wage amount at that time. So to move it to living wage, we had to make all of those steps at least minimum living wage. So that's why there was that range of people.
So we had fixed them. To answer your question, who fixed them? We did. We fixed them when you first gave us the charge of eliminate repeating steps and move people to experience. So the differential between 0, which was no experience, 1, 2, 3, which was a couple years experience, that's how the tables existed up until this point. So adding this piece on just compresses that. And to your question as to whether or not we can just renumber them and say, all right, well, if everybody's going to step 12, 12 is the new 0, then that means people who are on 13 are the new 1, and if I'm on 15, I'm the new 3, and we would have to go back and sort of have more conversations with folks about your step is now lower, even though your salary is not lower, to do that, and we'd have to do it quickly.
Because we finally got people to where, when they call me and I look at their experience right now, I was looking so forward to next year to say, okay, you have 10 years experience, pretty sure you can go on step 10. It's more of a step 10. Like right now, I still look at who works for us currently, how many years experience do you have, and what step are you on? So that I am fair to people coming in and the people that we have.
And in fairness to your question, Sharon, it's not something that we can't do, that we can't look at. Our window of opportunity, because our staff will be leaving next week, and we'd like to give them at least some kind of contract that says what step, what level, what you can anticipate. We'd like to have the budget approved, and we'd like for July 15th, when the first payroll comes out, we want everybody to be happy on that day. So our window of opportunity to say, could we go back and sort of retool this, that's a very timely activity, which I think we could probably figure something out if we had much more time. But we have a very short window of trying to make sure that we send staff home with some knowledge of where salary-wise would be.
So I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
We're putting this living wage. How many administrators will be affected by this? Their steps? None.
No, teachers would not either.
No teachers, no administrators will be affected by it.
No, sir.
So mostly will be your bus assistants, custodians.
Classified.
If you look at the ones with 3, those are the people that are affected, and I wanted you to see who was on each pay schedule. And I did the 3 different scenarios, so that the original is what we have now, the living wage A, living wage B. So you can kind of see, and then you can look down to compare how that would affect people below them.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I hope I'm not hearing it wrong, that people will resist their neighbors and friends to go up 20 cents higher because they can have a livable wage. Do you foresee a resistance from their colleagues and friends and their superiors?
I think the resistance would come if I am an IA2 and I went to college and I have my degree and I worked really hard to make sure, a lot of people, our IA1s get their degree and then they go to an IA2. And if the difference between what you're telling me the value of that is now, you minimize that just a little bit.
But the other option is status quo, where all will stay where they are and the people who are below living wage will stay as it is. Versus people who are below living wage can lift up, so at least somebody is moving up.
We're not arguing with you. We're just trying to give you factual information. So, whatever the guidance is from the board is what we will do, but we just wanted to make sure that you had all the information so you can make an informed decision.
I think this is a good start. We have to start somewhere. We don't have unlimited resources. I do worry about a retention problem with supervisors who now the difference in income is so small that was it worth it for them to invest in themselves in terms of education and experience? So that's where I have some reservations about bringing up the bottom without making maybe not a corresponding adjustment, but some kind of adjustment. Because you've painted a scenario where some supervisors will make less than new person?
That's right. Yes, the one that we pointed out.
Okay,
would,
but
yes.
these are isolated cases that maybe we can look at on a case-by-case basis. And by the way, I did the math, and so with the benefits, the more expensive scenario comes to about $150,000. And the other one comes to $94,000, rounding.
Yeah, I appreciate all the hard work, and obviously with the discussion, it's pretty clear it's complicated, and kind of that's the way life is. I have a general support for the sheet A close to living wage adjustment. We're going to have issues with people getting compressed on steps with various experiences. If you pick the living wage, then that exacerbates that issue. The living wage, I don't know. It's it's a calculation. It's a number. What impressed me more, was with the issue of transportation and the chronic shortage of bus drivers. That's the market saying we need to increase our wages. So, and I think we get close to living wage. It's a good step, and it avoids some potential issues with people with no experience making more than people with supervisory experience. And I don't know if you've gone through all the categories to check that or not.
We did not have time to get through
what you have here on your classified pay schedules, there's 50 different categories.
Yes, sir.
I think we all need to recognize there's probably going to be some tweaks next year, but
As I listen to the discussion, I'm concerned about the potential morale piece that may come up, but I support our item B with some further understanding as we go forward, knowing that by July the 15th, obviously, we would have worked all of this out. I want to take my hat off to Dr. Gupta, because this will be the completion of my 5th year. And to my knowledge, each time that we've done these budgets, there hasn't been this kind of conversation about a living wage, and for the superintendent and staff to actually put in all the hard work to present something to us really speaks volumes about what our intent is going forward. And so if the 2.4, Mr. Beckles, if I'm understanding correctly, which would come about with an adjustment to the health budget. Well, maybe I wrote the number down and it should have been
times
something.
12. Oh. Yeah, 2.4 million.
I'm saying that going forward, I would like to see us prioritize where there are monies available to address the living wage at the lower end, because I believe it is the right thing to do. And then across the board, it appears to me that through this process that we're able to find monies when we need to. And those monies need to get to the place where we can get the quality bus drivers, the amount of bus drivers. We need people into our school division. Every school division is struggling with retention of good people. But if the money is there, we need to put it in the people in front of our kids.
We need to be able to sustain it.
And sustain it.
All right, so we have two proposed, Dr. Gupta?
It's a step in the right direction. And I think personally as a board member, I like to see not only living wages, maybe catch up with the counties where we are falling behind in city school system for our teachers' salary. But this is first step. Other steps will be coming as we see the money. But this is, if there's resistance to lift people up, then how do you go forward taking a whole army of people with you? So this is a first step in the right direction. There are a lot of more steps we need to do, and there'll be one baby step at a time. So
I think a solution would be also that we have a lot of part-time bus assistants and part-time bus drivers, and as we look at building our workforce, that we look at how do we get these individuals to be full-time, that they get benefits, and that what kind of retirements are we able to offer people that work for us for 30 years and don't have anything when they retire. These have got to be priorities for us.
yes, I agree with you 100%.
All right, we have two plans in front of us. I've heard two people say they support Plan B. We're not voting. I'm just trying to give them a direction. I've heard, so far I have we're not voting. I'm just trying to come up with a way to let them know what they want to do. They want to know A or B.
So next step, so let me tell you what we would like to do. Our staff, BASS staff actually leaves on Friday. We're not going to be able to give BASS employees physical contracts. We just don't have enough time to run them. What we would like to do based on guidance, so if the guidance is leaning more towards B, what we can do is go back and sort of run what those contracts would look like. We can set up the payroll system in a sort of a demo mode to see what with the July 15th, because we want to make sure we get it right. So we have to have some time to set our systems up, and that's why we just need the guidance of which way should we be proceeding.
We're not, I just need to get a sense of where you want to go. I know that James and Atul both support B.
I support B if there's confidence that we can, it's sustainable.
And we can tweak the ones that there's supervisors are underpaid, paid less. I mean, not now. I said at some point. I didn't say now.
I think, I feel the same way. As long as it's sustainable, I am concerned about the morale of a supervisor that would be making less than an employee. I personally wouldn't accept a job that I made less than, but I think we're taking the right steps and we're showing the right intentions, and I feel as a division that we would be committed to somehow rectifying that. So that said, I support Plan B as well.
Anybody else want to speak up? Or forever hold your peace? Till the next meeting, or till tomorrow morning. Bob?
I like the idea of getting to the living wage. And I think we just clarify that the comment about the supervisory role is the one position which Ms. Evans pointed out, which is that it's a new head custodian with no experience. It's the only one that there might be an issue there. Everyone else is pretty equal. So it's not a question of that being a significant problem, except for that unique setting. So everyone understands.
In full disclosure, we couldn't run everybody, so we don't know that to be true.
The only one before us is that
we just wanted to give you some samples.
Thank you very much, but that's the one that's before us.
Categories here.
Yeah.
And I work with hourly folks, and I know I'm speaking out of turn, and 9 cents an hour difference between what is it, the supervisor making 15 cents an hour less? That's a big deal. That's just my experience, that's all, Everybody's gonna vote what they feel is appropriate.
Well, I think.
And I don't want that. Ms. G's the one that's gonna end up dealing with that, among others.
Well, and I think what we're saying is that there'll be situations where we have to look at the individuals and what they're bringing, and that we have that flexibility to do that. B. That if we have situations that we need to look at to get or retain quality people, that there are individual situations that we can look at. I know that we've done that for administrators when you're bringing in an assistant principal from one school system that might make more than others, that we look at things like that. All right, I'm sensing B is the direction. There may be some of us who have questions, but I'm sensing from the board that B is the direction, which means moving toward everyone with a living wage. Okay. Oh, do we have anything more?
Yes.
Oh. I did not make my 2-hour limit. Health claims risk.
So this actually ties into what Dr. Gupta said. One of the reasons, we are questioned as to why do you have money for reallocations, or why do you have money for fund balance. It's in times like this when our claims are low, that are sort of, the money that we budget for claims that we did not use sits there until we get to this part of the year. So part of what you used to fund the buses, and what we're looking at is coming from this health claims risk or this budgeted line, not the health reserve. That's totally separate. So my recommendation, if you go back to what I said about those three departments specifically, transportation, maintenance, and tech, and you heard from facilities that at some point they might have even, like, it comes close in January and February if there's no reallocation in the spring. So rather than putting them on the wait and get, what my proposal was to reduce that budget for claims by 20%. That's the money that Dr. Gupta is also talking about, and put some of that money into the tech, maintenance, and transportation budgets up front, so they're not waiting to get, they actually can think through, here are some things that I need. We still have to be cautious in how we use that money in case there's a bad year with healthcare, but it doesn't require us to reallocate funds, and it doesn't give them that agina of, I'm not sure if I'm going to make it through the year. So part of what that reduction, now that's risk, because what we're saying is we're not going to budget, let's say $1 million a month, we'll drop it down to $800,000 a month for claims on the hopes that everybody stays healthy and we don't need that, but we'll take that additional money or parts of it and put it in those lines so that we don't have these conversations about why are we always funding them at the end of the year. That's part one. Part two is to take some of that money, because I heard the word sustainable. And if you remember the pay tables, and this is, you're in my head, Dr. Coleman. If I'm on step 12, I'm going to 13. If I'm on 13, I'm going to 14. So we've calculated that cost. We calculated it over the old guides with the 3.67 guides, the December guides, to be about 1.2 million. I upped it, we're guessing, depending upon how all this rolls out, to be about 1.4 million. So rather than waiting till next year and saying, where are we going to get that money from just to move folks, that's not even if there's another increase or anything. We wanted to start a salary reserve with some of the fund balance. So at the end of the year, we would recommend putting about $1.4 million or so, depends upon what this everybody moving on their step costs us, in a salary reserve, so that we know when we get to 2021, funds are already there, and that's one less thing that we have to worry about. Now, if you took that money, and I understand your proposal, take that money and use it to bring everybody up, then you bring everybody up for 1 year, but we don't have any money to move them across the step, and we don't have any money for those three departments either at the beginning or the end of the school year. So that was part of what I had shared with the Finance Committee.
And is there any information about the stop-loss insurance?
Stop-loss insurance, I'm meeting with a benefits consultant on Wednesday. So after that, I'll have the information to present on the...
And I'm so happy to hear about these innovative ideas that are coming up in these committees. That's the reason why I asked earlier, because it's a wonderful thing when the expertise of board members are being utilized alongside of the expertise of the administration.
Mr. Beckles, just for anybody that may be listening, can you tell us what stop-loss insurance is?
Okay. Currently, right now, our medical insurance, we are self-funded, means we pay all of our claims. But what do you do to limit your liability? Right now, we have a stop-loss like reinsurance. We bought an insurance policy that says if we have any expense greater than $300,000, for example, if we have a $500,000 claim, we would only pay the full $300,000, and the stop-loss insurance would pay the other $200,000. What we're looking at now is to reduce that $300,000 stop loss. We're looking at it at $250,000, $200,000, and $150,000. How much would that cost? So let's say, for example, it costs us $1 million to do that, and we drop the stop loss to $150,000. So any insurance claim that comes in greater than $150,000, the insurance pays that, we don't. So that's the you kind of cover your risk exposure. You kind of contained it to a certain extent. Now you can't stop the 150 with 0 to 150, but you won't be exposed for anything greater than 150 if you would have a stop loss at 150.
Thank you. Dr. Gupta?
Just to explain, what we were trying to discuss in Finance Committee was how to mitigate that risk. because we go from million to 800. Are we taking risk if there are extraordinary claims? So reducing that stop loss threshold will help us mitigating, not all the risk.
Not all of it.
Not all of it, some
But
of
some
it.
of
So
it.
we're not taking a blind risk. We are covering our bases humanly possible. But going back to the conversation, there's one-time money and there's ongoing money. Correct me if I'm wrong. And one-time money in this coming year was $2.2 million and could be additional 1 million, so that'll make it about 3.2 from the money not spent
From health.
from health reserve.
Well, we just
The budget, health budget, health
spent
budget.
$1 million on the buses, so that,
Yeah, no,
we took $1 million.
oh, the million of the buses.
Oh, yeah, that's
So
gone.
about 2 million is left for one-time expense. Am I correct in assumption? On the other side is an ongoing money which could be available if we decide, the board decides to reduce that health budget from $1 million to 800. On a 12-month basis, that'll give us about $2.4 million. Maybe more if we don't spend on health, but that will be a one-time thing. But 2.4 will be an ongoing expense. Am I correct in assuming?
Yeah, what you do is you transfer the budget from health to, in this case, we'll go to salaries.
But wouldn't some of that go towards the stop loss insurance premiums, correct?
But not a whole
Yes, but,
And
yes.
I don't have no idea what those costs are, but.
Premium, it's like I buy $1 million umbrella insurance, I pay $100 on it.
Right now, we pay $365,000 for a $300,000 stop loss. So you are correct. Whatever, let's say it's $1 million. So $700,000 is coming out of that money.
Right.
Back into the budget.
We'll stay in the health plan to pay that premium, then the difference goes.
But we asked about how many claims do we have for more than 150 or 200, and you said they were not very many.
year.
This year or the previous year or the trends.
We don't have any over 300,000, and we have, the question was how many do we have above the 300,000 stop loss? None.
How many about 200?
From January 1, 2018, but this last fiscal year just gone, the highest we have had was 172,000. From July 1, 2017 to July 30th, 2018, we've had 1, 2 above 300,000. You had 364, 476. The next highest after that was 172, 156, 155, 138, 135. So you see it goes down. Now in this particular case, if we had the stop loss at 150, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 would have been covered by the insurance. We would only pay the first 150 on each of those. Now, if you have, like one year when we had a lot of the claims that was under the 300,000, well then the stop loss don't kick in. It's a gamble either way you go, but, and then you adjust it each year depending on what things happen. So I mean, it's just one of those ways, like the Gupta was saying, is to mitigate the expenses and takes it off of us and puts it on the insurance company.
But it's like a bank bucket where the employees are contributing as part of their health benefit, right? They pay into the insurance funding. They contribute insurance premiums, which comes into that bucket.
That's correct.
And you use money from that bucket to pay.
Right.
But out of how many? We got 1,000 employees?
We have, now how much we have in the plan? The insurance plan is 1,060. I haven't. We have 1,367.
So it's the stop loss ratio is pretty low. We got 5 claims out of 1,000, which crosses the threshold of 150 and above.
Well, it has been.
In the future, nobody knows, yes.
Exactly. We only could go by what it looked like in the past.
And we do not want to have happened what 3 or 4 years ago when it was very close in terms of the large claims.
What I would say at this point, we have 2.2 million in the reserve. So let's play the worst case scenario. If our expenses blow up to 2.2 million, we still okay. We just go to the reserve and take it back. Now, once you use that one time, you gotta be able to put it back. So that's the other side of that equation.
And you're meeting this week with,
Wednesday at 9 o'clock, I'm meeting with we have a benefit consultant that schools in the city use. And I'm having them go through running the numbers, getting all the quotes for the various stop loss premiums. So when I come back, we have what I call a full analysis of report, and we can make a decision based on the information we get.
and I think the question is that we're looking at this reserve and how we're spending it. We know we have made a commitment to salaries, and the sustainability is very important for us to be able to continue to do these things for our employees. And I think we have to protect ourselves so that we can do that. The other question is, with the remaining money, I think I asked the question, what is the total technology need? What is the total budget? Because what you've been saying, they've been waiting to catch up. And what I would like to do moving forward is to know ahead of time at the budgeting what it is that they need, so that we are putting into the budget what we need for transportation, what we need for facilities and maintenance, so that they're not holding the building together with glue, waiting for the cement to come in, so to speak. So I think that's moving forward. I heard you say that too. So what is it that you're asking us tonight?
So I need a little bit of guidance, because if we're going to establish a salary reserve, we currently do not have one, which would require that Anthony and I at least meet with the city manager to sit down and go over the ins and outs of how we're going to do that and what that looks like going forward. So we wanted to make sure that we had the guidance from the board to go ahead and do that. We did have a conversation with Nora and Walter regarding the legal parts of it, so we're okay there. But the logistics of it now, we would have to meet with the city manager. And then the second thing is just guidance to say yes, because right now, if you remember what our budget looks like, we put everything we had into salaries. All the other departments were frozen where they were, because we pretty much told them you're not getting any more money, including maintenance tech and transportation. So if we're going to do something different, where we're looking at putting funds up front in those departments, and we'll certainly sit with them to kind of go through the exact needs, it would be with the board's blessing that we're going to reduce the benefit claims budget line.
Doctor, just a logistical question. So do we need, if we want to decrease the amount that's taken out monthly for the benefit claims by $200,000, if we decide to do that, do we need to decide before the school board budget is approved where that money goes, whether it goes in the, because I think that, to me, I have no trouble with reducing it. I think it's been thought through. It makes
Because
a lot
we
of
need
sense.
more
The
information.
question is, where does the money go, which I think is a big question.
About can we reduce it, and do you want us to explore the salary reserve parts? Because those are things that we need to put in motion if we're going to do that.
Sharon?
Are we confident that the salary reserve, the city will count that similar to the healthcare reserve? So if we have 1.4, 2.1 salary reserve, that it won't be, they won't say, we'll take it now, because we need it.
Part of the agreement that we have with them, which is the agreement which Vice Mayor Dolan spoke about when I went to council, talks about the school board's ability for long-range planning and things like that. So I cannot say for sure, absolutely that's not going to happen. And I think as we work together and we have a positive working relationship, and they understand that we're trying to do some long-range planning in accordance with that signed agreement, that's one of the things that we want to sit down and talk to the city manager about. But if you're asking me a direct question, that did I get a guarantee that there's a no backsies, no touchies, did not get a guarantee on that.
But
Dr. Gupta?
Let me just finish my thought. If you're going to put that money in salary reserve, then why do we reduce it? Because it's just relabeling the money. Because end of the day, if you leave it $1 million, we know end of the year we'll have the reserve left over to cover the expenses. So if you're going to relabel it from $1 million to 800,000, take 200 out and put it in a separate bucket of salary reserve, that doesn't make sense to me. Leave it $1 million if need be. We know end of the year we'll have the money left over and we can use it. So I'm not able to understand putting in that different bucket will make any impact. You know what I'm saying? The value of it. And you're taking a risk, but what you're doing is you're relabeling that hold, I call it a hold of 200, into a salary reserve hold, labeled as salary reserve.
Yes, I'm understanding what you're saying, but right now, if, let's say we leave it and then we get to this point right now where we have $1.4 million left. We have two choices. We can reallocate and use the money in the current year,
one-time
which doesn't
expense.
help us for salaries, or we let it roll the fund balance, and then we have to write to city council and say, can we use this fund balance for salaries? So in a sense, yes, we're doing the same thing, but we're doing it after the fact, as opposed to showing council we're trying to do long-range planning by setting up a salary reserve up front. That's the only difference.
Salary reserve is also one time unless you refurbish that reserve on an
Yes.
ongoing basis.
We understand.
So that bucket is usable only one time. Unless you use this amount to uplift the salaries and make it an ongoing fixed cost. You see what I'm saying? Otherwise, the reserve is a one-time expense. Then we need to find money to refill that reserve if you use it for salary purposes to make it you know what I'm saying?
I understand what
to
you're
make it online, so ongoing.
Dr. Coleman?
Mr. Beckles, what are your thoughts about what Dr. Gupta just stated? Because I'm wanting to suggest, even though we're just discussing, to go ahead with the salary reserve fund and the 200,000 as was stated, but is
Well, we're not voting on that tonight,
I know we're
but
not. Well, let's don't worry about it. What I'm wanting to do is.
well, thank you for that.
Then what can we do to indicate we are giving direction?
Well, I think what she's asking for is to get directions to go and explore what that looks like.
So,
We're not-
so what does
How-
that look like? I'm saying
I'm
what
s-
I'm saying, then
I-
I'm in
we're-
favor of it.
Looks like the direction you gave me on A and B, which gave me direction, so I'm just
Right, so,
kind of looking for yay or nay, go that
Go
way.
look. All right, Sharon?
I think we're guaranteed that we can have the money to do what we want to do if we keep it as is. Without subtracting the 200,000 and then just leaving the,
Well, we don't know that unless we,
but,
Because you can't use it
but we can
for
use
next
it.
year for salaries. It
It
has
would-
to be used in this year, does it not?
I mean, we're not talking about this year. Are we talking about this year going forward?
Well, a reserve is a little different, but any existing balance at the end of the
Has to be
year
used this
is
year.
fund balance.
Which is different.
Right.
Right, so let's say it's a million, 2 or 3. It's $3 million that's going back to council.
Right.
Unless we
and
put it in
have to
salary
write a
reserve.
request for
Going
how we want
forward.
to use fund balance.
that's what, we'd have to fund it in our budget with what we,
So are we talking about going forward too with this or just this year?
no,
We're
we're
going to talk to council about it.
going forward.
We're trying to buy us some protection over the next couple years as we develop these new strategies going forward.
Bob?
So.
Just one, just one clarification point that on the June 4th meeting, we're gonna vote on the school budget for 2019, 2020. And the issues, are there gonna, how do I want to put this, that the issues we have discussed tonight, which have to do really with the pay schedule, I guess is the main impact on that. But this current discussion does not impact that. We're not gonna come back on June the 4th and say we decide to set up a reserve or we're gonna put it into the maintenance. That can be decided at a later date during the year.
Because we
Well,
have to
I'm asking,
present
because I wanna know as
budget.
we're asked to vote, you know, what that vote is gonna be.
We would have to, what you're doing is adopting the final budget. So
Right, I know what we're doing, right, but I asked before that with the decision about where that money goes, whether it goes in a fund reserve or whether it goes into maintenance, is that gonna be part of that decision? I thought you had said you just wanted to have permission to
Guidance
go
to
and
go.
look into the reserve
Guidance
and
to
find
look
out if it's an
into it.
option or
do
not.
that at any point. I don't think we're limited in, has to be done.
One of the things we want the permission to explore is the mechanics of how that
Right.
Works.
Right.
works. If you notice, the city did a similar thing to get their
Right, when they did their study and they
The
put
one in
money
March,
aside,
and they
right.
get their ongoing
Right.
salary market adjustment payment going forward.
Right.
So that's what we want to do, is go and look at how do we get all the kind of questions you have now
Right.
with the detailed mechanics.
Right.
And that's why we want permission to explore that, to see exactly, so when we come back, we can explain to you, it works like this, like that, here's what isn't in it, here's what is in it, here's what we could. Those are the things we want to be able to explore and get the answers to before we come back and say, recommended
Right.
course of action.
Right. So if you come back with that, will it be part of the budget discussion? Say we've investigated this, they said we can do it, so therefore we're going to propose that we do it as part of the budget?
That's a short time window, I don't.
Yeah.
think they
Once
could.
we have all the let's assume something in the details
Yeah.
comes and there has to be an attachment to the budget. Now we know how to tell that to
Okay,
you.
sure. So it's not going to be decided on June the 4th is my other question. We're not going to vote on whether there's a reserve or where the money goes into maintenance or not on June the 4th for the
I
budget.
thought we had to spend it. Or then request permission.
Well, whatever, you just reallocated for the budget.
Okay.
So there's still some money that we did not use on those other items which
Right.
we had brought toward for you.
Yeah.
And there will probably be additional money. What's gonna happen to that money is it's gonna roll over, if we don't do any reallocations, it's gonna roll over in the fund balance. When it rolls over in the fund balance, we now have to make a request of council of what we
Keep it.
want to do
Right.
with that money.
Right.
So, recall that I said if that's about an additional 1.5, it would be a request to say, this is money in fund balance, I want to take some of this and put it in a salary reserve. Now, we didn't do that until, like, that was, when did we make our request for last year's fund balance? It was October-ish.
2 months ago.
Like audit's got to complete.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
other-
it was pretty
that's
late,
not
so it's
until
not,
November.
Yeah.
it's not going to be at
Sure.
this budget board
Discussion.
vote. Yes,
Right, thank you.
yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
So am I sensing that at least discussion? So that we at least know what we're talking about?
Sure.
Dr.
But
Gupta?
discussion doesn't mean commitment.
Right.
We are still moving in this direction with an open mind. Am I correct in assuming? Because my personal take is, we know there are significant salary gaps, as I heard in those presentations, between county and Lynchburg City school systems. So if we got extra money, we need to backfill or fill those gaps before we start putting in reserves. The reserve is an important fiscal decision, don't take me wrong, but our current state doesn't allow us to put things in reserve when we know people are way behind and we have retention issues as a result of those gaps.
The way you explained it to me is you're putting money into savings when you can't pay your rent.
Yes.
That's the way he explains it. That's how I understood it. I mean, so, all right, so you have direction?
Yes.
All right. We have a busy schedule with graduations and celebrations. I want to thank all of you all for being there Sunday. It was a powerful moment. Sharon, I'm sorry you were out of town and could not get back, but it said a lot for our community. And it was, I don't think I've ever seen such a sight as the EC Glass football team, the Heritage High School football team, the Jefferson Forest football team, the Appomattox, Brookville, LCA. It was a powerful moment for our students and their families and for the community. So with that, we're adjourned.